This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What am I like? I didn't mean that like, oh, what am I like? I meant, what am I like? Am I like a terrier, a dog with a bone? What's the figure of speech we would use? There's some subjects that I will never leave alone until I come to a better understanding of them. And I feel that every time we address the issue we're about to address, from slightly different angles, usually, we come away with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more understanding. Alan makes an early powerful point. It's the cult of personal responsibility, James. All these people claiming that the problem is poor parenting or a lack of willpower or even laziness. They often come from a pious position of I can resist and therefore you should too. But I tell you what, Alan, they also come from the opposite position. They say things like, well, I'm very overweight, I'm very fat, and I can tell you that all you need to do is eat less and exercise more. Even as you are living, walking proof that that's not as easy as you make it sound. If it was easy to eat less and exercise more, you wouldn't be fat, right? So we are coming back to this question of what is peculiar to Britain. And part of the problem, of course, is the media. I'll beat you to it, shall I? In the course of this conversation, there'll probably be an advert for junk food on this programme. And that will be part of the means by which I pay my mortgage this month. Right? So I'm clear about that. But this is the editorial bit of the programme, which may well rely on adverts, but I don't have to pretend that mainlining McFlurries into your blood system is the only way to achieve a youthful complexion. I can tell you the truth. But I don't know whether the Daily Mail is being entirely responsible when it pretends that the list of foods facing an advertising ban includes porridge and yoghurts. Well, except, of course, it does include porridge and yogurts, but it doesn't include like a plain yogurt or a tub of porridge oats, the stuff you've got in your cupboard that you only use when you're making flapjacks. That's not fair. Actually, some people like porridge. But the plain porridge oats that you have in there, they're not going to be. What's going to be the problem here are the little sachets you get that have got like powdered honey in them and salt and fat and sugar. So what is on this list of foods that they're going to ban the advertising of will be things that are full of salt and fat and sugar. And it will be the levels of salt and fat and sugar that determine whether or not they get into the banned list. So some unexpected things may dip under the wire, like quiche Lorraine or sausage rolls. And some unexpected things will get over that. But why? If you're serious about helping the health of the country or improving the general welfare of the nation, why would you put together journalism that seeks to denigrate a good plan like this before it's even started by misrepresenting what the plan actually is? This is misinformation. Oh, hang on, excuse me a moment. Have we got a jingle yet for misinformation? Is it ready to go? Have we got a jingle, have we? Oh, well, let's see. Well, I think that was a rhetorical question, actually, but it turns out it wasn't, because the answer is actually yes.
Missed information.
Whoa! It sounds like Emily Mayliss. Sounds like we got a proper presenter to do a jingle on this one. So missed information is a irregular feature, like all the features on this programme. Irregular to the point of disappearing because we forget about our wizard wheezers almost as soon as we formulated them. But it's when I use the news, the way things are reported differently, to show you how much contempt you're held in by the kind of people that put together the Daily Mail or write columns or base their broadcasting on the editorial slant of the Daily Mail. The complete contempt in which these people hold you. So today's example is junk food fast. Keir Starmer's junk food advertising ban descended into farce last night as it emerged porridge oats could be targeted. But it didn't. Porridge oats with loads of sugar and salt and fat added could be targeted because sugar and salt and fat are being targeted. So that's missed information for you. It's a great example of us. It's not the best example in the news today. What happened then? Honestly, you wait ages for a jingle and then two come along at once. That's absolutely ridiculous. Keith, behave yourself. Honestly, 8 minutes after 10 is the time. That's not the best example of missed information. There's a story about prisons which almost defies belief, and I speak as the person who invented the missed information strand with a shiny new jingle provided by Sting. It's a sting, isn't it? Not a jingle. The shiny new sting provided by the doyenne of British broadcasters, Emily Mayliss. Now, this show is going places. This show is cooking with gas. Emily Maitlis doing the stings now. Where will it end? So don't let me forget that. I might stick a post-it note on my forehead so that we can definitely remember the other misinformation that's coming up later in the programme. So the media jumps on this story because of, I don't know, a dependence upon advertising or an inability to reflect the reality, the knowledge. Here's the generous interpretation. The queue for the ghost train will always be a lot longer, and this is quite apposite, isn't it, than the queue for the Speak Your Weight machine. So what you want to do, if you're putting together some journalism, you want to give people something to be angry about. So you come away from this story and you go, oh, flipping heck, it's the nanny state, innit? It's the nanny state are ruining our lives, stealing our porridge, whatever next. It's ridiculous. And yet, the more you understand of the story, the more you read of the story, the more you care about the problem that the story or the policy is designed to solve, the more you realise that journalists and journalism does us a grave disservice in spaces like this and so many other. The government wants to prevent 20,000 cases of childhood obesity by removing 7.2 billion calories a year from diets. There's some criticism of this, of course there is, and some of it might be valid. The suggestion that it will only, some experts have calculated, it may only reduce calorie intake by 2 a day per child, and the cost is potentially enormous. But I don't know how you'd calculate that, and it is better to try than not to try. So they're looking to remove calories. Everyone writing this bilge knows what they're looking to do, remove calories. So obviously the foods with the most calories are the ones most likely to be affected by the ban on the advertising. Thank you to Chris, who tells me he's just crumbled some lovely Biscoff into his porridge, and that has immediately gone from being healthy to being less healthy, right? Everyone understands this. So what's today's phone-in? Today's phone-in, okay, here's another thing, right? I don't know if you follow me on Blue Sky. I tend not. I just use Twitter really to punt the clips from the program and promote the. Well, that's actually the podcast of the show. That you can listen to the show in full on catch up now via Global Player. So that's pretty much all I'm doing on there these days. But on Blue Sky, I'm trying to sort of recreate the magic that once draped itself around our Twitter accounts. And I did something last night that I think might be relevant to this conversation. I think it might be relevant to this conversation. I posted a picture of some sweets, right? Because I had discovered them for the first time, and they were, they were absolutely delicious. If you're anything like my age, you might want to sit down for what I'm about to tell you. I found them in Morrison's. I don't know if they're available in other supermarkets, but these things generally are. But Barrett's have taken some of their all-time smash hits, refreshers, the crumbly ones, not the chewy ones. Wham bars. Do you remember Wham bar? You remember Wham bars? Not good for your fillings, but wait. And 2 other of their all-time classics. And they've turned them into jelly beans. So they've taken the flavours from your favourite childhood sweets and turned them into jelly beans, one of the most delicious sort of sweets in its own right, now enhanced by having the flavours of your favourite childhood sweets. Now, listen to the way that I'm talking. Listen to the. You can almost hear me salivate. Well, I hope you can't. That would be a very unpleasant experience on your radio. You've got dip dabs, pure sherbet. The pure sherbet now in a jelly bean, and you've got fruit salads. 2 flavours of refresher as well, lemon and lime. So look, you can imagine what they taste like. They taste like childhood crossed with heaven. If I was French, if I was the most popular talk show on commercial radio in France, would I have done that? You see, I don't think I would have done. I think I'd have been more likely to post a picture of a delicious cheese. I also have some delicious cheese. Thanks to a listener in Stilton, appropriately enough, Jen, who sent me a lovely box of cheese as a Christmas present, which I will be enjoying this weekend. But if I was a French or a Spanish or an Italian radio presenter, would I be posting pictures of sweets, which are, without reading the ingredients, almost all sugar? Would I actually be doing that? Because I'm not sure I would. So it's important, isn't it, to recognise not necessarily that you're part of the problem, but you are very much in the area of the problem. There's one Daily Mail columnist today who manages to blame everything on parents when it comes to childhood obesity without mentioning that a couple of weeks ago she was writing how amazing Ozempic is. But we'll leave the Daily Mail columnists to deal with their own inconsistencies and hypocrisies. I did it with Caramac recently as well. I don't know if you remember. I started waxing lyrical about Caramac bars because it had been announced that they were going to be axed. And I suggested to you that in my experience, what you do is announce you're going to axe something popular, create a bit of a PR brouhaha. It's an agreeable rhyme, isn't it? A PR brouhaha. And then announce that due to popular demand, you're actually going to bring it back. And I think, if memory serves, that's exactly what happened with Caramacs. So here I am. Never, ever holier than thou. Now, slightly overweight, but nowhere near as overweight as I have been at various times in my life. And touch wood, less overweight than I will be at any point in the future because I'm just a little bit more on it. But I don't do as much as I could. I certainly don't anymore, but I used to sit here shouting about how important it is to eat less and exercise more while being living, walking proof that some people find that almost impossible. Some people find it incredibly easy. I was with Alex James yesterday, the bassist in Blur, for this week's Full Disclosure that you'll be able to listen to on Friday. He dropped 4 or 5 stone before they went on tour. And he think about that, 4 or 5 stone. What he did, it's a great story actually, spoiler alert, he got his Britpop trousers. He got his trousers from the last time Blur were playing, and he sort of pinned them up on the wall where he was doing his exercise, and had made a commitment that he was going to get back into those trousers before he got back on stage at Wembley with Blur earlier this year. It's a fantastic achievement, and he did it. Lots of us couldn't do that, or maybe we would really struggle. So, British food. They are staples of British cuisine, writes the Times today. Well, not quite as irresponsibly as the Mail. Quoting Wes Streeting, the health secretary, as saying, obesity robs our kid of the best possible start in life. So with the adults, we seem to have accepted, don't we, I think, that this drug is a bit of a magic bullet. These jabs that you get that help you lose weight, they suppress your appetite, alongside lifestyle changes or making permanent or long-term changes in your life. But that's a lot easier to do when the heaviest of lifting is being done by the drugs. So we accept that adults need help. And yet we still, as Alan pointed out at the top of this hour, when it comes to children, it's still very tempting to blame it all on parents, or to blame it all on society, or to blame it all on how spoilt they are these days. It wouldn't have happened in my day. So why are British children bigger than most or almost all of their counterparts? I'd say, without triple checking, I'd say that British children are bigger than all of their European counterparts, but probably still a little smaller than their American cousins. Why? Now, you know that I'll probably mention that school dinners menu that a British mother in France sent us earlier this year and repeatedly reminds me of, happily, every time I mention it. She sends me it again so I can make sure I've got my facts right. A piece of fruit, a 3-course meal, some dairy, a happy meal, as in a meal that makes you happy, but not a meal that is loaded with fat and sugar and salt. It's the British malaise that I want to pinpoint today. Because I mean, think about, and it is another opportunity, I think, to draw comparisons with other countries that you've lived in, but not you, it's children. What's it like to be a child? And every single time, in case you ever wonder why I have such a bee in my bonnet about these secretly funded lobby groups that pass themselves off as think tanks and educational charities, they're dedicated exclusively to promoting the interests of wealth, even when wealth is making money from poisoning our children. I've told you this a million times, or from making our children fat, from shortening your children's lives. But here's another guest from the Institute of Wizard Wheezes, or the Genius Alliance. We're all here. The Tax Avoiders Alliance. We're all here to tell you why that nanny state is terrible and we shouldn't be doing this. That's my starter for 10. Why do we have such a problem with this in this country? Because secretly funded organisations are never off the telly, never off the radio, trying to condemn governments for trying to actually improve the market in which our children are currently free to gorge on everything from bags of chips to, well, forgive me, but bags of jelly beans. It's the access, it's everywhere, the ubiquity of unhealthiness. And then what the story about porridge does today is remind us of something else. It reminds us that even the stuff we think is healthy isn't healthy. This is where the Mail is so insidious, because every year or so the Mail will run a story about smoothies, and the Mail will run a story about how smoothies aren't as healthy as you think because they contain so much sugar. The sugar they contain is fructose. So technically, yes, it's sugar. But they kind of portray the thing you think is healthy as being unhealthy. And now, today, they're portraying the thing that is unhealthy as healthy. You see that extraordinary backflip. So here is some porridge to which loads of fat and sugar and salt has been added, therefore it's unhealthy. And they're claiming porridge oats are set to be subject to an advertising. They're not. And then give it 6 months, there'll be a story about, the smoothie you think is good for you. Well, think again. It's full of sugar. So I don't know why they do this. I think it's probably the old thing about scaring people, making people angry, pretending that they're under attack and preventing anyone from helping them. There might be some advertising involved as well. But British children, I hesitate to ask this question because it's a bit brusque and a bit brutal. But why are British children, should I just say bigger rather than chubby? Do you think, do we have a problem with the vocabulary? Should I just say bigger? Why? I think we'll just say bigger. Why are British children bigger than their European counterparts? And crucially, what do you think we can do about it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I'll take anything you've got. The more comparisons you can make with other countries, the more interesting perhaps, but by no means definitely, it will be. Why are British children bigger than their European counterparts? It's 10:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10, and there is another wrinkle in the hypocrisy here, isn't there? There is a kind of what would you call it? A sort of myopia in the way that we talk about children and the obesity problem that children suffer from. While we've all been embracing the miracle drug, I saw a friend the other day who'd lost 5 stone as a result of using, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying that they needed to, but the Ozempic has changed their life and almost certainly lengthened it. So, or Mounjaro, various names, aren't there? Generic names for the anti-obesity injections, the anti-obesity jabs that are changing people's worlds. So why, when it comes to children, do we still reach for, oh, they play too much FIFA or they eat too much junk food? I mean, it's true, but at the same time, this is not a solution to the problem that we are discussing. Why, with British children, is this problem so acute? Let's start with Georgia, who's in Henley. Georgia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Splendid. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just listening to what you were saying before. So I'm 20, and when I was younger, I was talking to the lady beforehand about how I've noticed a change.
Yeah.
But when
in your life?
Yeah, a little bit, because I think I remember a lot of my primary school days. And when I was at primary school, I remember how important sport was and the idea of being outside and getting involved in teams, even if I was in the worst team.
Yes. But
still being able to enjoy the most delicious food.
Running around.
Sport.
Well, I think if your metabolism's in overdrive at that age, and you don't even have to do that much exercise, but if you do some, then you're probably going to burn off everything that you've eaten in the last 24 hours.
So having kind of the Friday fish and chips at school was something to be really enjoyed and not kind of worried about. But I think definitely something that I've noticed as I've gotten older and moved through different schools is how younger years sport isn't as important. It's so easy to get out of it, non-compulsory, and this idea of losing that recreational and team wanting to do more sport, and at the same time the accessibility of fake food becoming so much easier.
What's fake food?
Well, I think it's something, if you turn over the back of the packet and you can see that it's no longer just flour, water, sugar that
Oh,
makes
you mean
up bread.
ultra processed and
all the
what
other
have you?
stuff that
But you're
goes
only
into
20. I balk at the idea that there's been a visible decline in the course of your lifetime. But you're almost certainly right, because the problem's getting worse, not better. It's at school playgrounds. I mean, I started doing this job in the year that you were born, Georgia, and even then, please don't laugh like that. And even then, we were bemoaning the closure of school playgrounds, the selling off of school sports fields and sports facilities. But the simple fact is, loads of people can go through the state school system in this country now without playing any sport at all.
And that's just not right.
And that there is something that the government could be turning its attention to quite early. But I don't know how you do it. How do you introduce sport to a school that has no sporting facilities? And thank you, Georgia. How big a problem is it that so much of these conversations are conducted by people like me? So I can conceive of a school with no sport, but not really. Because as we've discussed a million times on the programme, you can't help but draw on your personal experience. And as I've told you a few times, the school I went to, I think it had 40 tennis courts. It had an 18-hole golf course, full-size cricket pitches, rugby pitches, even had a pack of beagles, which always raises something of an eyebrow and a smile. So I can sit here and say, but I don't know. No one's counted. Who can tell me? Why aren't these think tanks calling themselves educational charities, why aren't they looking into how much open space schools have? How easy is it to go through the British state school system from the age of 6 to the age of 16 or 18 without really doing any exercise at all? I do not know the answer to that question, and that is part of the problem that we're articulating or addressing today. Laura is in Tunbridge Wells. Laura, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. Yes, I was just listening to the feature, and just a lot of it seems to sit around the culture. So I have two children, one's in primary and my other one is in the second year of her secondary adventure. And there's a real culture after school for children just to come out and feed into the local corner shop.
There's a sign on the door that says only 3 at a time or something like that. Yep. They all go in. They've all
queue out.
Yeah, that's the one.
And also then exactly that with the fish and chip shops as well. So there's a real sort of habit of coming out of the school and just feeding our bodies with a serious amount of sugar and junk food. And my daughter, I try to educate her a lot about, it's not just about what size clothes you're in. Actually, it's all around your internal organs and having a healthy body. And to make those decisions is really hard for her because all of her friends are buying the massive bags of Haribo for the bus journey, and she's sort of a little bit isolated. Because
so you are still imposing this, are you?
I mean, I don't know. I don't.
Does she have the money that she would need to buy?
They all. They have the cards.
She's buying the sweets, mate. You know she is.
I mean, and again, I wouldn't want her to be her Achilles heel in her friendship groups as well. So
and to feel rotten. This is the biggest change between my parents and me as a parent in terms of this context. There's lots of other changes as well. But when you give your child a treat, you feel good. You like, and treat is a bad word to use in this conversation 100%. As well, of course. I mean, lots of people say, but your child is craving sugar and you give them sugar and your child is briefly happy. You think you've done an act of good parenting when you've in fact done an act of bad parenting. My parents didn't find it hard to limit us to 10 pence every Friday to go to the corner shop and buy a little paper bag of mix, mix up, a 10p mix up. And that was it. Apart from Easter and Christmas, that was pretty much it. But I guess what we weren't doing was walking down a kind of metaphorical corridor of confectionery every day, all day, and asking our children to somehow develop immunity to it.
Exactly that. And I mean, I always say, I am going to be the bad parent. I am the one that says, I'm afraid you can't have that. But in the longer term, I hope that they understand that there's a reason for us doing that. And exactly, like I said to my daughter, if I give her a bag of Haribo, she'd be like, oh, thanks, Mum. If I gave her a carrot, she'd be like, I'm not eating that.
No. And I don't know does that ever change? I mean, and also, again, it's probably the Catholic in me, but again, the guilt. In that if you met someone, if you were at a play date or you were at the soft play or something like that, and someone had somehow managed to raise a child who greeted a carrot stick with the same joy that your child greets a Haribo, you'd hate them.
Yeah, well, and it's a real, and this is the dilemma, isn't it?
Yes, you'd hate if well, flipping right. You're not playing with that kid again. And yet that's what I mean. Oh dear. That's what I mean by not realising you're in the problem. I wouldn't say you're necessarily part of the problem, but you're certainly in it. You're in it, and you don't realise it. Which is why that post last night on Blue Sky about these sweets was suddenly hit me around the back of the head about 5 to 10 this morning, just before we came on air. Why am I posting about how delicious these sweets are? I could have posted a picture of the stir fry that I cooked last night, or I could have posted nothing, actually. That might be. No one wants to see your stir fry, mate. At 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 is the time. It's it's going to be snacking, I reckon. If you really had to break it, if we could do this scientifically, here's what you'd do. You'd have various different laboratories in which you were raising children, right? Various different tests. And you'd start with a list of 10 things that you think might be problematic. And you'd have one universe with one thing removed. So what would you remove first? So you might say ultra-processed food, okay? But I reckon snacking covers a multitude of sins. So snacking is much more likely to be ultra-processed food. How hungry were you as a child? How often were you hungry? Were you hungry when you got home from school? You'd toast. You'd go toast. You'd make toast. You were hungry when you got home from school. You're not hungry now when you get home from school because you've had a Savoy and chips on the way. Snacks, isn't it? It's the idea of meals being movable. Another message from France telling us that very young children are allowed a goûter, a taster, if you like, mid-afternoon, just to get them through until dinner time. But apart from that, 3 meals a day, 3 set meals a day. You don't see people eating in the street, really. You certainly don't have, you might have some fast food joints, but people in France go to the bakery twice a day to get fresh bread. Part of the reason this is fresh in my mind is because I've done full disclosures recently with Alex James, I mentioned earlier, who does a big food festival, Feastival, in the Cotswolds every year, and is, of course, a cheesemaker and now makes wine as well. But also Michel Roux, the restaurateur and television presenter, who spoke at great length about his childhood in this country as the son of French parents and the differences between his packed lunch and everybody else's. Snacks, I reckon. All right, Vinny, probably the kids aren't eating Savoys, I'll give you that. But it's a figure of speech, isn't it? But what is it I want? What's the phrase I'm looking for? The laboratory conditions. The laboratory conditions in which I reckon you'd see the biggest change would be the laboratory conditions where you got rid of snacks, even more than the laboratory conditions where you introduced more exercise, because their metabolisms go like the clappers, given the chance. So take snacks out of the picture. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just trying to work out why British children are more overweight than almost all of their comparative counterparts. Jackie's in Halezone. Jackie, what would you like to say?
I think a few people have mentioned a documentary to you called Irresistible.
This is Van Tulken, Chris Van Tulken.
Yes.
Yes.
If you watch that, it blew my brains. And the diet that you've just described that the French have is how we grew up 50 years ago. That was our life. That was 3 meals a day, 1 snack.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And not necessarily, well, you get a biscuit maybe, wouldn't you, when you came in? You get a digestive biscuit or something. And also,
no.
What would you get? What would you get?
My parents got a piece of fruit.
Really? A piece of fruit?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
No, we got a digestive. That's the difference between Halezone and Kidderminster, you see, Jackie. So Halezone's always been more highfalutin than Kidderminster. You get fruit in Halezone, you get a digestive biscuit in Kiddie. And when did it, I guess this is the point, isn't it? Is the change not just in what we're eating, but in when we're eating and how much we're eating.
Absolutely. And if you watch that documentary, it shows that, when you're a relative cooks a cake at home, my mum was an avid baker,
yes,
that it would be made with sugar, flour, eggs. When you buy a cake, it's got fat, sugar, salt in it.
But this is true everywhere. That doesn't change when you cross the channel. So why are we addicted to the stuff that's full of rubbish as opposed to still in the biscuit? It's quite easy to bake a cake and it's quite pleasurable and it's quite nice. Yeah. But do you think that's a post-war thing? Do you think that because when I was a kid, a fondant fancy for Mr. Kipling, it seemed like more of a treat than my mum's lemon drizzle cake, which my mouth waters at the memory of my mum's lemon drizzle cake. But for some reason, a fondant fancy for Mr. Kipling's felt like it was a different species of sweetness.
I think maybe, and it's one thing that it may as well, is the cheaper foods are much more ultra-processed. So if you buy something that says, handmade or whatever, or it's more quality ingredients in it, it's much more expensive.
Can be, can't it?
Plus, the kids these days, local children, have access, like you've said, about the amount of fast food outlets. There should be some kind of...
So what would you change? What would you do for... Because again, that's another thing they start shouting nanny state. You say that you're not going to be able to open any new fast food outlets within a 1 mile radius of a school gate, okay? So if a kid...
Stop them?
Well, they'll have to walk a mile to get there. And that's better than just falling out of the school and falling into the chicken shop, I remember that the school opened near us a few years ago, and within a year of it opening, the street opposite, like the parade of shops opposite, had changed quite a lot. 2 or 3 of them had become chicken shops and fast food joints, and the sweet shop was doing business like it had never done before. So you could say, perhaps, you can't open new ones a mile over. What would you do if you could do one thing? What laboratory conditions would you introduce? What single change would make the biggest difference?
I think our problem is this food pandemic is like smoking. It's not just going to go away overnight.
Yeah,
it's going to take years to try and bring things back. But I think we need to take a turn and look at how we eradicated a lot of the public places being in smoking, doing the same with fast food.
And we started with advertising as well, remember?
Well, I don't think that's going to make a jot of difference.
We did with smoking.
Not with fast food. It did with smoking.
I always remember the complaint someone sent to the Advertising Standards Authority about one of the adverts that they put up on billboards when they were trying to discourage people from smoking, showing the cholesterol build-up in your veins that can be contributed to by smoking. And they wrote to the ASA, I'd like to complain about this advert. It's really putting me off smoking.
But the thing is, we don't start smoking, a lot of us, until we're adulthood. Okay, some people start at teens.
But some of these children are starting at 4 or 5. They're starting in the cradle. I mean, you see it, don't you? And you feel a bit, I don't know what the word is, uncomfortable, because you're feeling real disapproval, and yet there's nothing smugger than disapproving of other people's parenting decisions. But you're seeing people give babies food that is appalling for babies. And you can't... You can't do anything. I don't know why I said babies like that. Sometimes my voice goes places I'm not expecting it to. Babies! Jackie, thank you. Do you know what I was going to do? Because I mentioned, I'm not name dropping. I only did it yesterday, and I really like him, and it's a really good interview. But Alex James was talking about how one of the first gigs Blur did was at JB's in Dudley, but I've got a horrible feeling it's shut down, hasn't it?
It's been gone a while now, but what a venue. I'm glad you remember it too, because it was fantastic.
It was fantastic, yeah. Well, don't tell Alex James it's gone, will you?
No.
He'll be gutted. Still got very happy memories. Kate's in Parma, in Italy. Kate, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Kate.
I've been listening for years from Italy, and I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you.
I've been here for a long time, but I've brought up 5 children here. I'm Irish, as you can hear. And I find the main difference is that meal times here are sacred. So children and people in general have 3 meals a day. They have a very light breakfast, they have a good substantial lunch, and they have a big evening meal. And they don't tend to snack all day long. When I used to shop with the 5 of them in the supermarket, I didn't have that scourge of the sweet counter at the checkout.
When did it start? I mean, when did it start? Because it didn't happen when I was a kid.
When did what start? You mean in Ireland?
The scourge. I don't know. Well, is Ireland more like the UK, I imagine, than it is like Italy?
Yes, it is more like the UK, and we notice that when we go home. No, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, in Italy, you don't have that problem because mealtimes are so important, and maybe because there's a big food culture here, which we haven't. It was like,
we haven't got it the same in the UK and Ireland, but we definitely had a reverence for mealtimes when we were young.
Yeah, we did when we were children, and we still do, and in my family we still do, but a lot of people haven't. And I think it's partly because people aren't cooking at home. I mean, here it's very important that people sit around the table together, but I think in Ireland and England, it's become less and less important.
But why? Every question comes back to why here? Well, because all of these forces could apply in other places. What is it about these islands, and I include the island of Ireland in that has been so vulnerable or susceptible to these kind of changes?
Possibly been receptive to outside influences, to American ways of eating.
Could be that we're closer to America.
Not having the.
Oh, she's gone. But the sit down meal so again, laboratory conditions. This is quite a good experiment actually. So over here, no snacks at all. Over here, well, it's the same laboratory, isn't it? 3 meals a day, no snacks at all. So that's one laboratory. No snacks, 3 meals a day. I think that laboratory is going to come top when it comes to reducing obesity in the future for the children in those families. But I could be wrong. You know the number. Greg's in Wigan. Greg, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm a little uncomfortable speaking to someone called Greg about food. I'm not going to lie to you.
It's a bit of a sticky name at the moment, isn't it?
This too will pass, Greg. What made you pick up the phone?
So I just want to give my perspective. Obviously, in Wigan, there's no kind of grammar schools and no kind of private schools, and I think a lot of the way...
obviously, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's one of those places that just doesn't seem to have some. And I think when I was at school, kind of seen this bullying culture in kind of the state schools around here that led to a lot of children getting weight gain. And I think the attitude given towards children in those schools, I mean, I remember when you had a certain BMI, when you were over a certain weight, you were taken aside out of classes and put into these fat loss classes.
Right.
And kind of ostracated from your peers, and that kind of led to a bullying culture and a lot of children to gain weight.
Well, and I see, because it makes the problem worse, not better. Because a lot of people, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 23 now, so I went to school in the 2010s.
A lot of people my age can recall when you would know the name of the overweight child in your class. They would be so rare that their nickname often would reflect their weight, and that has changed so much. The idea that the one or two, in my case, boys usually in the class, that you can still recall because they were and that was obviously metabolical, because we all played the same sport, we all ate the same food, so it was obviously genetic or biological as opposed to cultural or behavioural, and yet now it's exploded.
Yeah, and I think another thing as well is like the access to sport in the state schools. I know your first call was talking about kind of they had great access to sports and stuff. In state schools, it's very much put to the side.
What did you have? What access did you have?
Oh God, we got optional kind of rugby classes and rowing classes, but no one ever took them up. There was not that.
Wasn't compulsory. You didn't. You didn't have to go out every Wednesday afternoon or something.
Yeah,
like that.
It wasn't seen as a priority. The priority in state school was getting your GCSEs and studying hard in class, except if you were an overweight kid, we were took aside and kind of ostracated. And
is that you? Are you talking about yourself here, or are you describing other?
I'm describing other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't one of the people that was kind of ostracated. But I think it's just,
I've got to stop you. I don't think that's a word.
All right.
If you hadn't said it 4 times, I'm not being mean. If you said it 4 or 5, is it ostracised?
Ostracised, mate. Yeah.
I like ostracated. I'm going to start saying ostracated, but because when you said it the 4th time, my antennae started twitching a bit. So I thought I'd point it out just in case I was. This is a lovely word. Phil in Germany is going to adopt it as well. And I mean, I'm surprised to hear you say this, because I thought being overweight was so much more commonplace now that it would have actually almost ducked under the bullying bar in a way that it didn't do when it was 1 or 2 kids in the class when I was at school.
It might just be my perspective on my school, but
if it happened,
there was a big bullying culture in my school that led to a lot of people gaining weight.
And that's what you highlight, is that quite often this attitude, I mean, even shouting "eat less, exercise more" at children is likely to make them feel bad about themselves. And what do you do if you feel bad about yourself? If you're caught up in this spiral, you eat more food. And not the food that's good for you. You eat the food that gives you the temporary dopamine hits. These are my favourite subjects, because the ones that you can't help thinking must have simple answers, but don't. And you just edge ever closer to some sort of clarity, some sort of illumination. So the laboratory conditions in which you can just tweak 1 or 2 things and then compare all the different experiments. So ultra-processed food removed from one of them, but you've still got snacking and you don't have 3 meals a day together. Another one, you've got no snacking and 3 meals a day together. In another one, the children can't access fast food joints or sweet shops on their way home from school. They're all sort of variations on the same theme. But I don't know how big a deal the advertising is. I really don't. And that is where the government is addressing its attentions today. It does feel a little bit like, if you pardon the pun, that they're just nibbling at the edges of the problem.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Do it, do you think, as a parent? Could you make your child the only one that didn't fall foul of these temptations? I mean, in a way, it doesn't matter if they're playing sport on the kind of scale that used to be commonplace but is now largely confined to private schools. Could you do it? Could you be the one? Could you? I mean, good Lord, if you could bottle that, you'd make a fortune. Could you be the one who successfully achieved the situation where your child is delighted to get a carrot stick when all their friends are being given sweets? I don't know. I mean, could you do it? Could you? I love that word, actually. I appreciate that he invented it. But ostracated is actually, it goes to places that other words don't go, because it's a combination. I just got a text off Andrew Marr's producer, so you can tell the clever side of the LBC team, saying, well, it's like a cross between ostracised and extricated. So it was actually the perfect word, ostracated, because it's not just being removed, it's also being ostracised. So the combination of bullying and physical removal or being put into a different class, you could literally describe it as ostracating. It's a brilliant word. I shall be using it henceforth and confusing everybody who wasn't tuned in at 10:51 on Wednesday, December the 4th, 2024. So you've got that problem of ostracation. Could you do that to your child? Everyone's going to the chippy after school, Mum. I don't care. You can't. I'm not going to let you. You can't have the money that you need to go to the chippy. You've got your Oyster card or your travel card. You don't need any money. Can you send your child out without money? I don't think you can send your child out without money. Can you send your child out without money? Got a smartphone. It's going to have an app on it that is probably... Could you do... I don't know. Could you even do it? It's all about the parents, writes a columnist who's been... waxing lyrical about their weight loss drug use in recent weeks. You couldn't make it up, could you? The lack of self-awareness among these people is absolutely weapons grade. So could you do it to a child? I don't think you could. I don't think you could. Prana's in Hampton. Prana, what would you like to say?
Sorry, James. What do you call me?
I said Prana. Is that not right?
Well, no, it's Prana. Prahna.
That's what I said.
Prana.
I said Prana.
Last time I was on here, James, you called me Prana and you're doing it again, mate. It doesn't matter.
I said Prana.
It doesn't matter, mate. It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter. It's your name.
It doesn't matter.
But what am I saying wrong?
Hey, you said Prana. Kids at school call me Prana. It upset me. It doesn't matter.
I said Prana.
Mate, it doesn't matter.
It matters to me. I need to get it right. Tell me if I've got it right this time. Prana.
That's beautiful, James.
That's what I said the first time.
And the full version is Prana Pug.
There's something fishy. There's something fishy going on here.
Hey.
What do you want to say? What made you pick up the phone?
Right, thanks, James. Listen, private schools, right? Very important point here, right? My son goes to private school, right? And I say the issue is not private schools. It's not. The issue with me, as far as I'm concerned, is two things: it's poor choices by the children, right, and overindulgent parents. And when I point a finger, I know at least 3 points.
It's not a great phone line. It's not. I'm not going to say your name. I'm going to call you mate. It's not a great phone line, mate. So
I've got an idea.
Have you put me on speakerphone? Right, we'll come back to... that's better. Go on then, carry on.
Right, yeah. What I was basically saying was it's a combination of poor decisions by children, right, and overindulgent parents. And I understand that when you point a finger, at least 3 points back, I get that, right, because I'm one of the parents. But in terms of my son, he's at private school, right? Yeah. And do you know what? He gets all Friday afternoon to play any sport he wants. And do you know what he chose?
What?
Golf. He chose golf, right? So he stands at a bloody driving range and hits a bloody golf ball, right?
Golf is exercise. It's not. It's better than doing nothing.
He's on a driving range, James. I'll pick him up. Right?
Still, you can get quite tired on a driving range. It depends how much effort you're putting into it.
Then he comes home. Right? And the first thing he does, right, he gets on Fortnite with his fat mates, right? And he's got the ice cream out. I said, Mrs., look at him.
This isn't helpful. Right? This isn't helpful, Prana.
It is. Look,
it's not.
They've got vegetarian menu at school, right? How much healthier can you be? Vegetarian menu. They play loads of sport. He's massively overweight. My missus says, "Don't worry about it. He's just a kid. He'll grow out." I said, "He's 16 now."
Oh, I don't think it helps for you to be shouting at him like that.
I'm not shouting at him, I shout at her.
Well, you're shouting at me now, and you shouldn't be shouting at her either.
I'm not shouting at you.
You are shouting at me. You started off shouting at me.
You can hear me.
What?
You said you can hear me.
What? Yeah, but that was because you were on speakerphone. It wasn't because you were talking quietly. What?
All right.
What's your situation? What sort of way to you?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, James, right? A true story, right?
All right.
I had no notion of how it looked like when I was at primary school, right?
Yeah.
So my first PE lesson at secondary school, the PE master said all the kids out on the grass, they go on, and you've got two big lads, right?
Right.
They said, go on, pick teams, right? I'm sitting there, it's a lovely September afternoon, I'm sitting there, and I'm sort of sitting in the grass enjoying myself.
Oh, what a shame. I think, I mean that sounded sarcastic. The phone line went down. We'll never know how that story ended. Benedict is in Aylesbury. Benedict, what would you like to say?
Yes, hi.
Hello.
So I feel quite strongly about this. So my mum is French. I was born in the UK, so she's Parisian. During the summer holidays, my brother and I would go to my grandparents' beach house in Western France. So you're highly encouraged to do activities, so sailing, windsurfing, tennis, whatever you fancy.
Gosh.
And you're there most of the morning. You go with a goûter, so, you're not hungry.
Yeah.
And when you eat, you have something healthy. We go to the market every morning, buy food for lunch, dinner, whatever. Lifestyle is completely different. Meals full of vegetables, protein, you'd have a yogurt.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? How different it is. Just a short hop across the channel and something's happened here in the course of my lifetime. I'm obviously much older than you. That I can't make head nor tail of. We didn't used to be like the French. We didn't have boulangerie. We would still be eating sliced bread from the supermarket and keeping it in the kitchen for a week rather than popping out once or twice a day to buy fresh. So it's not as if we've diverged from an identical path, but we've sort of plummeted into an entirely unrecognisable space. What do French friends and family make of this country when they visit in the opposite direction?
Well, it's just completely upside down. So, in the UK, you have that mentality of, it's Friday, it's Saturday, let's get a takeaway. Whereas when we go to Paris, for example, for New Year's and Christmas and New Year's, yes, you will have cake and sweet treats, but they're freshly baked. You have them in moderation. Otherwise, you're walking everywhere and you're still active. Whereas in the UK, and I have noticed this, you're sat in front of the TV, you won't move.
Are you susceptible to it yourself, or have you managed to rise above the fray as a consequence of your cultural heritage?
So I'm 31, so for the last 30 years, I've been in France and the UK, so I'm happy to say that, I don't have that culture of let's get a takeaway, let's do this. I'm very much in that French.
Yeah, is it laziness? Is it laziness? Is it the food?
Yeah, it's laziness.
I see that's a pejorative. It's a no. I don't know. Is that the right word? It is, isn't it? It is. Why are you getting a takeaway? Because I can't be bothered to cook.
Yeah, and it's a Friday as well. Let's just do this. And I think it's the parents as well. So from a young age, my brother and I are brought up to stay active, eat well, don't sit in front of the TV for hours.
And the idea that this can somehow be achieved through, I don't know what the word would be, sort of little behavioural nudges is palpably absurd when you look at the amount of money that's been pumped into promoting the stuff that's so obviously bad for us. Something else you'll notice in France, in the worlds of advertising and the rest of it, the importuning to put this stuff in your system is quiet, close to silent compared to what it's like here. Oh, it never stops fascinating me, that. Next time we turn to this topic, perhaps we'll get the end of Prana's story. I don't know, but apologies to him and to Andy, Graham, Mary, Jill, Alex, Louise, Jamin, all of whom keen to contribute. Because I've said it before, I'll say it again. In terms of the things that we feel we can control, so I don't know how easy it is to control the economy or to increase growth, but in terms of the things that we feel we can control, this is probably the most important issue that we ever discussed together. That sense that something can, not something must, but something can be done. And one day we'll pin down what it is. But it wasn't today. Although I think we edged a little bit closer.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. It's Wednesday as well, so we've got PMQs coming up at 12. You're going to laugh at me now. Unless you're going to agree with me. I suppose you could laugh with me and agree with me, or you could laugh at me and agree with me. But I'm looking forward to PMQs in a way that I can't remember doing so before because of Kemi Badenoch. I just find myself, what's she going to do now? You could almost imagine her getting a sort of Nerf gun out and starting firing little rubber bullets at Keir Starmer or something like that. What is she going to do next? How many feet can you get in your mouth at the same time? I don't know if there's a record. So I've got a sort of frisson of anticipation. I always enjoy it. I always think it's interesting. I know that you sometimes don't, but I always think it's worth doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. But I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, particularly when she was away, I just found myself missing it. I don't think I've ever done that before. What's going to happen this week? What's she going to do this week? Just I'm afraid it is a form of Schadenfreude. It's sort of watching someone make a fool of themselves can be highly entertaining. It's not our best self, is it, that enjoys that kind of spectacle? But it's coming up at 12. And I bet you're wondering now what on earth she's going to do this week that prompts gasps of incredulity from friend and foe alike. So that's coming up at 12. Before that, here's an absolute humdinger of a
missed information.
I like that. It's got a touch of the Chris Morris to it, with the authority of a mate list, delivering that final punch of credibility. I'm going to read you something from one newspaper today, and I'm going to see if you notice the problem with it. All right. Labour's early release scheme for criminals looks set to continue for years after it emerged. The prison building programme is 5 years behind schedule. The taxpayer will also be hit with an additional bill of at least £4.2 billion to pay for an extra 21,000 prison places planned by the Ministry of Justice. The delay means jails are now expected to have a shortage of at least 12,400 places and possibly as high as 21,200 within 3 years, a report by the National Audit Office will say today. It means more criminals are likely to avoid jail or be released early to prevent dangerous overcrowding. Estimated costs for the building scheme were originally put at £5.2 billion in 2021, but are now expected to hit between £9.4 and £10.1 billion. Auditors, I could go on. What's missing from that story? What, in any honest, vaguely honest universe, what would be present in that story? I'll give you a clue. It's in the very first line of another newspaper article. Boris Johnson's plan to provide 20,000 new prison places by 2026 was due to be completed 5 years late and billions over budget, a scathing assessment by Whitehall's spending watchdog said yesterday. Those are the facts, right? It was Boris Johnson's plan. He announced it. He probably did a lap of honour and claimed that he'd already achieved it, like he did with the hospitals. Those are the facts. Daily Mail manages to write 30 paragraphs today, 20 paragraphs today, without mentioning once that this failure is a failure of the last government. In fact, they bend over backwards to make it sound like it's somehow a failure of the current government. Even the claim that the early release scheme is Labour's, despite the fact that the early release scheme was introduced by the Conservatives and tweaked by the Labour government. 14 years in power, not a mention of your role in creating a situation that you're trying to pin on the door of the people who've been there for 5 months. Boris Johnson's plan. Does Boris Johnson's name appear in the newspaper where he currently writes a column? No, it doesn't. Does the word Conservative appear in the newspaper where Boris Johnson writes a column? No, it doesn't. Does the genesis, the origin, the provenance of the entire policy get a mention in the entire newspaper article? No, it doesn't. And that is why we've actually made a feature, and even now, thanks to Emily, made a sting of
missed information.
How do you do this? How do you write an article about the failure of a Tory government policy without mentioning the Tory government whose policy has failed? And indeed the Prime Minister who made a big song and dance about it. It's absolutely stunning, and it goes on all the time. In a similar theme, in a similar space, here's a story that is going to make your hair stand on end. How many cases do you think there are currently in the backlog in our courts system? The head of the Crown Prosecution Service told MPs yesterday that the backlog now stands some 90% higher than it did before the pandemic. What do you think it is? How many cases currently caught up in the log jam, waiting to get to court? Higher? No, higher than that. It's 82,000 cases in the backlog. And I'll say it again, that's 90% higher than it was before the pandemic. And things were not great before the pandemic. They were certainly not perfect. there are several statistics in this story that Stephen Parkinson gave in his evidence to the Commons Justice Committee yesterday. But I think that, and the two that stand out the most, one I think we can talk about, one we probably can't because it's too speculative and theoretical. Suspected criminals are exploiting court delays by pleading not guilty in the hope that their victims will drop out of trials. Why would you drop out of a trial? Answer, because it can take years to come to court. I'll say that again, years. It's another one of those stories that we kind of know about, right? You're conscious of the court's backlog, aren't you? You know that it's taking ages to come to court, but unless you've actually had proper personal experience of it via yourself or via someone you know well, someone you love, you probably don't appreciate just how appalling this is. Years. Some cases now are being listed for 2027. It's currently, of course, 2024. So that's defendants and victims waiting up to 3 years from now to even have the prospect of their day in court. Because, of course, there's no guarantee that you even will. Some of these numbers are going to stun you, I think, if you're not across them already. People waiting years for justice include victims of sexual offences, currently waiting an average of 2,307 days. That's 6 years between reporting the crime and a verdict being reached in the Crown Court. This is official data that the Daily Telegraph have analysed. If you're a victim of fraud, you've got the second longest wait, 1,647 days, or 4.5 years. Public order offences, 668 days. Drug offences, 632 days. Violence, 509 days. I'm hoping that we'll reach one which is under a year between report and verdict. Possession of weapons, 499 days. Robbery, 473 days. Theft, 458 days. Criminal damage and arson, 443 days. So whatever the crime is, the gap between you reporting it and you having your day in court, you getting a verdict in court, is over a year. I think that the sexual offences statistic is a source of national shame, a source of true disgrace. If you had to make a list, and I don't like doing a hierarchy of crimes necessarily because it's simplistic, not because it doesn't make sense. It makes moral sense, but some cases are much harder to bring to court than others. But if you were in charge, you would probably want a system where sexual offences were among the cases that proceeded most quickly, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? So what's it like? This is a really simple question, but it is one informed by news that the amount of time passing between reporting a crime and getting a verdict, these are big Crown Court cases, is unconscionably long. So what does it do to you? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What does it do to you? Because I think most of us turn up, if we do. I can't remember the last time I reported a crime. Oh, yes, I can, actually, but it was a crime I solved. It sounds a little bit odd. We found some bags that had obviously been stolen a couple of weeks ago, took them to the local pub and posted on social media about it. I think I told you at the time, did I? Posted on social media about it and reunited the owner with his bags. I didn't catch the criminals responsible, but obviously we told the police what was going on. But the idea that most of us carry in our mind, until we are absolutely exposed to it and immersed in it, would be you can walk into the police station or you can phone the police, give the details of the crime that has been committed, and in the event that the person accused is not going to plead guilty straight away, it's going to be years before you get in court. Shall I deal? I haven't looked yet, but let me just deal with Idiot's Corner quickly. Here's one. Ben writes, being a racist on social media and it'll only take a few weeks. Yeah, so 2 problems with that, mate. if you're talking about the Farage riots, everybody who's been to jail pleaded guilty to offences that were not being racist on social media. And secondly, no one was even charged or accused of being racist on social media in the context of a criminal conviction. They were charged and convicted of much worse offences, up to and including trying to set fire to hotels full of human beings. But you crack on. I think you've accidentally tuned into the wrong radio. Well, actually, no, you've absolutely tuned into the right radio station. I just hope you can hear. So you presume when you report a crime, particularly perhaps a sexual offence, that the wheels of justice will move quickly. I think you presume this anyway. You certainly used to presume this. But they don't. And listen, I do this for a living. And so does Eleanor, the producer. And we both were goggle-eyed this morning at that 6-year figure. Couldn't quite believe the 6-year figure, which is an average. It's not like the outer limit. It's not like up to 6 years. This is how long it takes between reporting a crime and getting a verdict in court. 14 minutes after 11 is the time. Just tell me your story. I don't have a big set up on this one, or a big agenda, or a big mystery to solve, or a riddle to unravel. I just want to know what it's like, because I can't imagine what it's like. I mean, and then by the time you come to give evidence, I mean, so much time has passed that it's going to have an impact upon your ability, presumably, to do it. What is the... I mean, I don't know that anyone's going to have... Well, you are, of course you are. If suspected criminals are exploiting court delays by pleading not guilty in circumstances where they're obviously banged to rights, but they know it's going to take so long to come to court, they may as well stick a not guilty plea in there and just cross their fingers that you lose the will to pursue the case in the course of the years that will pass between report and resolution. You just would, wouldn't you, if you were a wrong-un? What have you got to lose by pleading not guilty? Normally, in a well-run justice system, you plead guilty straight away and you get dealt with straight away. You plead not guilty, you run the risk of a bigger sentence later, which is why it is usually the solicitor's advice to plead guilty if the evidence is mounted against you, if it is obvious that you're guilty. But if you want to roll the dice, on the one hand, you run the risk of getting a longer sentence when you've pleaded not guilty and are subsequently found guilty. But on the other hand, you run the risk, you take the chance of the victim of your crime giving up. And I would have thought this is why I'm so troubled by the fact that sexual offences are at the top of the list. I would have thought that the sexual offences area was the one in which you might be most likely to lose faith, because we talked earlier in the week about the loss of faith in the police and how it was much higher among women, or considerably higher among women than it was among men. This must be part of it, mustn't it? I know it's not the police's fault. It's not the fault of any of the people who are paid to provide justice. It's not the CPS's fault. It's not the judiciary's fault. It's not the legal profession's fault. And it's certainly not the police's fault. I guess it's probably the politician's fault in the context of not having dealt with the consequences of the pandemic better. So no doubt tomorrow the Daily Mail will be writing up as Keir Starmer's fault, despite the fact it has absolutely nothing to do with him, and he's once again charged with the business of undoing the mess that he's inherited. But it's not. But if you were a woman and you were a victim of sexual offence, and you're 2 years into the wait, I can see the temptation just to make it go away now. I don't want to think about it anymore. I've got the thing on the horizon. I'm dreading giving evidence. I don't want to drag it all back up again. I thought it would be done and dusted by now. It was hard enough. Do you know what? It was hard enough going in there in the first place. And the longer it stretches on, the more likely you are to lose the will to continue. That is utterly, utterly heartbreaking. So I want to hear from you if it's happened to you. Any kind of crime. And how long? And almost you'll be in the middle of it. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 6 years for sexual offences. 2,307 days average. I genuinely can't believe that. Fraud, 4.5 years. Drug offences, nearly 2 years. Violence, 509 days. Weapons, criminal damage, arson, robbery. The gap between report and resolution is so long. I want to know what it's like to be in that gap? What does it do to you that the politicians probably need to hear, probably need to understand? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What does it do to you to be in this space between? And I guess everyone involved in a court case is going to be, it's going to have relevance. But what does it do to you to be caught in a years, plural, a years-long wait between reporting a crime and between the reporting of a crime and the verdict being delivered in court? I find it inconceivable, actually. Jack's in Brighton. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I'm on the other end. I'm the one who's been charged with a crime.
Okay.
It's not, my initial hearing was in August, and my trial now isn't set until May 2027.
Good Lord.
And I was meant to be starting a apprenticeship this last going month, but because they won't hire me now because they can't hire me with the case hanging over me.
Yes.
They need to know whether it's a guilty or non-guilty verdict before they can run a risk assessment. So it's kind of put me on the back burner now, where I was kind of about to start
for 3 years, for the best part of 3 years.
And that the thing is, that's when I go to court, that's when the apprenticeship was due to finish.
You're going to plead not guilty, I presume.
Yes,
otherwise you wouldn't be ringing me. Okay. Well, we don't need to go into the details of the case, but I mean, you could tell me what you're accused of if you want.
It's GBH, but
okay.
It was a self-defence. So
okay, that's for the judge or the jury to decide. But the idea that you have, I mean, I think most people listening are going to have, obviously, Jack, more sympathy for the people, the victims of alleged crime than the perpetrators of alleged crime. But the limbo that you're in is extraordinary, actually, because you can do nothing now, and your plans to get your life on track, that's probably an unfair phrase, but your plans to get going have been absolutely iced.
Yeah.
So what do you do instead? You just crack on with what do you do? I mean, instead of the apprenticeship, what are you going to do between now and May 2027?
Back to 9-to-5 jobs, really.
As opposed to trying to build a career.
Yeah,
and it doesn't limit your ability to do. You don't have to declare the fact that you're on bail, I suppose, are you?
Yeah, so I didn't have to declare it, but I had to go through a DBS, and because it was relevant to the job that I was going for, they put it on the DBS either way, which I understand.
Of course, yes.
But that's what's put me back. But my thing is, they still, when I went to my initial hearing, they're still blaming COVID for the backlog.
Well, COVID is responsible for the backlog in one sense, but the failure to deal better with the backlog is not the fault of COVID, is it? It's and this is for the people you're dealing with. This is all normal, and you're not an exception. You're the rule. This is I mean, such an incredibly long amount of time. Is this the first time you've been in trouble?
Yeah.
Because you can't compare it to what it would have been like 10 years ago if you'd been on a GBH charge, how quickly the wheels would have turned then. And what do your lawyers think? Do they think you've got a good case?
Yeah, so they think I've got a good case. That's one of the reasons why I'm fighting it and I'm doing it.
Because the temptation, that the bigger the disruption it puts on your life, if it wasn't going to be a custodial sentence, the temptation to cop a guilty plea.
That was my initial. That was what I was initially going to do. But my lawyer told me, because of the evidence and stuff, he said it would just be silly for me to just go guilty for the fact that it gets it over quickly.
Right. But you can see where the temptation comes from, can't you, Jack? I'll wish you luck, mate. And I can do that because I haven't asked for any of the details about what has gone on. But as I said, again, self-defence or otherwise, the sympathy initially and naturally goes to the alleged victim as opposed to the alleged perpetrator. But that notion of being stuck on hold or of being tempted by a guilty plea, even though you believe you're innocent, because the nature of the system is so sclerotic. This is not ideal. Carl's in Sutton. Carl, what would you like to say?
Well, I was a security officer at a hospital.
Right.
And it was just the beginning of COVID. And obviously we didn't know enough about COVID and so on. So anyway, we got called up to a ward where someone was being quite aggressive towards the staff and that. So we've gone up there. There was a gentleman standing there with a pair of scissors in his hand and a jug of water in the other hand.
Okay.
I didn't even have time to even put my Protect PP stuff on. So I just went towards him. He stabbed me in my hand. Anyway, cut a long story short, this has been going on for over 3 years now. He was being charged for ABH.
Yeah.
And then what happened was, I was told over these 3 years, if I got any holidays booked, I need to tell them. And I booked a holiday to India to go get my teeth done. They tried to cancel it and said I could be contempt of court because there was a court case then. I said, well, I need to get my teeth done because there was an infection. Anyway, cut a long story short again.
Yeah, go on, man. First time for everything.
Yeah, every time the court case would come, he would disappear.
He would?
And he would disappear, he would disappear.
So so it's a slightly different failure of the system that leaves you in exactly the same situation as everybody else, just not knowing when justice arrives.
Absolutely.
Do you have the choice to drop it, Carl?
At one point, well, I didn't want to drop it.
I know you didn't, but do you have that choice?
They never mentioned that to me. They only just got in contact with me a couple of days ago. They've dropped it. CPS dropped it because he's claiming he has mental health issues.
Right.
So decided to drop the case, an ABH case.
After how long? 3.5 years?
Yeah.
So 3.5 years of being essentially messed around.
Absolutely.
And then at the end of it, they're told, oh, don't worry about it. We're not doing anything anyway.
Yeah.
How do you feel? How do you feel?
I feel gutted because he knew exactly what he was doing. The reason why he was kicking up was because he wanted to go out for a cigarette. We couldn't allow him to go out for a cigarette.
Right.
Also, I caught COVID because I didn't be able to put the protection on.
Right.
So, I just feel like this country, the system's so bad. Yet they can send people that were rioting to do with this race hate, the hatred thing. They were putting them in,
Yeah, but they pleaded guilty, mate.
A couple of days, yeah.
They pleaded guilty straight away. If your man had pleaded guilty straight away, you wouldn't have had this experience either.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's just,
I do.
The system's really messed up.
It is, yeah, but don't make the mistake. Don't fall into any Farage-shaped holes of thinking that this is the experience of people setting fire to hotels or attacking the police during the Farage riots is in any way relevant to your experience, because all of the people you're referring to pleaded guilty immediately, given that the evidence stacked against them was so obvious. That's why this story is actually about criminals exploiting the delays you described by pleading not guilty, and then in your case doing even more to wriggle and writhe away from the possible justice that they should be facing. So that's what happens. System goes bad for reasons. Bad people step into the space and give you false reasons to get angry with the wrong people. So be careful. It's 28 after 11. Sarah is in Bath. Sarah, well, I've just got a little gist of what you're about to share with us, and I don't want to squeeze it into the time that's left before the news headline. So I'll come to Sarah first after the news. Before that, just a little nod back to the conversation we were having in the first hour. And that I don't know how culpable you thought I was when I mentioned that I'd been using my social media to promote my latest sweets discovery, and that was probably relevant to a conversation about a country in which childhood obesity is endemic, because we're all part of it without necessarily contributing deliberately to it. It's not like I'm selling sweets, but I thought I'll post a picture of some sweets because they're delicious. If I was a French radio presenter, I don't think I'd have done that. So Jan's been in touch and she's listed the ingredients on top of my original post. Ready? Sugar, glucose syrup, maize starch, acids, citric, malid, acidity regulator, sodium bicarbonate, glazing agents, gum arabic, haranuba wax, flavouring, sunflower oil, colours, anthocyanin, lutein, carotene, plant concentrate, safflower and spirulina. It could be worse. I don't think there's any gelatin in there, which means vegetarians can enjoy them as well. But it just kind of underlines the point I was making about very casually behaving in a way that you think is normal, but is actually probably part of the ecosystem, a consequence of the ecosystem in which obesity can flourish. A smaller consequence of being in the same ecosystem is eating a bag of sugar and thinking that I'll tell everybody about it. It's 11:30 now. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think it's probably one of the best misinformations that we'll ever do, the way that one newspaper has managed to write up the prisons crisis and the revelation that fixing it is going to take years more than planned and cost billions of pounds more, without mentioning once the identity of the Prime Minister and the government who introduced the programme in the first place, partly because he writes a column for the same newspaper. But none of this is comfort to the people caught in the consequences, and that is that trials are now being set for as late as 2028. 2027 is commonplace. And Jack, I suppose, reminded us that this is going to have an impact upon people who've been accused of crimes they didn't commit as well. But I don't think anyone will blame me for having much, much more sympathy for victims of crime waiting for justice, which is what I'm asking you to share with us today. Sarah is in Bath. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Well, I just want to talk about my old man who was killed the middle of 2023. Death by dangerous driving.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I have to wait now until the middle of next year before we even get to Crown Court.
Gosh.
And in the meantime, you know, the other person is just walking around, isn't it? Their life carries on. You know, and it also, can I just say, there is something wrong. You can say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. There's something wrong with the justice system in this country that doesn't exist within Scotland. That if you actually witness somebody being killed, you don't have to give evidence. You can hide behind the law that says you don't have to give a statement. And it doesn't exist in Scotland.
I didn't know that. Know that. When did you realise? Because I presume, like me, you've not had a great amount of dealings with the police, with the criminal justice system, and you're reeling from the loss of your husband, for which you have all of our sympathies, enormous sympathy, and you presume that the wheels of justice are going to turn quite quickly, right?
Yeah.
When did you first hear? How did you react to the news that it was going to be years, not months, before you could even be in court?
I think that's really difficult to say because, you know, how do you draw a line under something? How do you feel that actually that the courts, the justice system is working for you when actually people just walk around with their everyday lives who are guilty, or not guilty, but have been, you know, stated through the criminal justice system.
Well, they're beneficiaries of working on the possibility, even the presumption that they will be found guilty when it comes to court. They are enjoying freedom.
Yeah, because they pleaded not guilty.
Knowing, perhaps, because their lawyers would have told them that this was going to be years before it comes to... So what have you got to lose by pleading not guilty?
Well, we haven't. It's just that what we've got is we've got a system that allows it to be dragged out.
Were you told straight away? Did your lawyers say to you straight away, I have to tell you now that this could be years, it could be 2025 before we even get a court date?
We didn't know that until we got into magistrates' court.
Oh, Lord. And they kick it upstairs and it prolongs the process.
It prolongs the process at the end of the day.
Can I ask you a question? And you can tell me to shut. You can tell me to keep my beak out if you want. But why do? I mean, nothing's going to bring him back.
No.
So why is this so important to you? I can feel why it is instinctively, but I'd love to hear your words.
Because we have faith, don't we?
Yeah.
We are encouraged to have faith in the British justice system. But there is still something wrong that we don't get justice for years on years.
90%
and there has to be a speedier process to the kind of serious crimes that we have in this country, and it should not be allowed to be constantly kicked into the long grass, and that's what we do.
Yeah, and it's a relatively recent development. It didn't used to happen, and some of the responsibility for this scenario will lie with COVID and the fact that the courts had to shut. But it's not like the end of COVID took anybody by surprise. Everybody knew it was coming. We were aware that the system was going to be hugely log-jammed, and the priority, and I think this does apply to the current government, albeit that they've inherited the mess from the last one, they don't seem to have prioritised speeding things up and getting more cases through the courts. I wonder, Sarah, if it's because there are, although these numbers are stunning, they're small. The length of time is enormous, and we can reel at the news that you know there are tens of thousands of people in your position, but there aren't enough people in your position for it to be a matter of national anger or national import. More people are angry about farmers having to pay inheritance tax than they are about people like you having to wait 2 or 3 years to see I can say the person who killed your husband, whether it was via dangerous driving or not, in court. So they're banking on the numbers, aren't they?
Right. We all have priorities in
life,
we
do.
And I accept that. I don't knock anybody down for that.
No.
But what I have here is I have issues with the criminal justice system, where we have different laws that apply in Scotland, in Wales, and in England.
Yeah, I can see why.
And for 20 years, it has been different in Scotland.
At which you've had a crash course in understanding. And
I have had one serious. And maybe the analogy of a crash course is not probably, but,
oh, you got yes, I do apologise.
We say things in life without causing offence, and I know when people say that to me, I'm not offended by it.
Well, I'm sorry.
But what I know is that the system fails in lots of shapes and forms when somebody is allowed to plead not guilty, or they say, I have taken legal advice that says I don't have to talk to you about what I witnessed at the end of the day. That is wrong. That is
I don't know anything about that, but I will now find out more. Do you know? Final question. And William Gladstone, Prime Minister at the time, said justice delayed is justice denied in 1868. And I think that's exactly what you're experiencing, isn't it? Just justice delayed is justice denied.
I think so. Or maybe when he was saying 18 whatever, maybe the government thought he was talking about a time on the clock, rather a time in terms of years.
Yes, I hear you, and no one would believe if they'd been presented with the facts of your case in isolation. No one would believe it was possible, or certainly wouldn't have done 5 years ago. Thank you, Sarah, and I don't know what else to say except to express once again how much sympathy everybody listening to this would feel for you. It is 22:12. William is in Leeds. William, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James.
Hello, William.
Great to talk to you, finally.
Oh, thank you. I wish it was on a happier subject, but but here we are.
So, basically, from the ages of 8 till 12, my trombone teacher sexually abused me on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times in the same week.
I'm so sorry.
And then because I was told to keep it secret, I couldn't control my behaviour, and I ended up in a children's home until I was 15 years old.
Right.
And came out the children's home and discovered drugs, and pretty much almost killed myself on a number of occasions, overdosing. Oh. And it took me till 6 years ago to actually bite the bullet and say I need to deal with this because it's causing me issues in employment. It's like I don't do the drugs anymore. I've managed to knock that on the head. But all my employment, all my relationships,
of course,
the time I spent in care, he stole my family life off me that I would have experienced during that period. So 6 years ago, I spoke with my parents and went to the police, and the case was opened. So the police, or the detective inspector that was handling the case to begin with, abandoned the case for about 18 months, 2 years, which is what we were informed by the second detective inspector, who took the case on and meticulously went through every document, looking back at all my care records and all my school records, and not leaving a leaf unturned. And it took 5.5 years for it to get to court.
And he was guilty.
And, well, he pleaded not guilty all the way through.
Well,
he had two previous offences which he'd been convicted for in the 80s and in the 70s and the 80s, again with male children.
Should never have been allowed near you, should he?
Yeah. And he got 17 years, but due to the way that everything is at the moment, when I was called up after the case to discuss how everything had gone, I was told he'll probably do 8.5 years.
Yeah, that oddly, given the nature of the crime, is not a consequence of the early release scheme that the last government introduced, and that the current one is accelerated because there are certain. But serving half of your sentence is normal in most circumstances. Can I ask you what that period of purgatory was like? What that period of inactivity? Because I think and I'm so sorry for what you went through. I want to say that.
Yeah.
And I want to say that what you did was incredibly strong and incredibly important, but you know that already. But what I don't have any idea of is how much worse the whole experience is made by the delay, by the wait that you wouldn't have known was going to happen.
Well, it's just that losing faith in humanity completely, and as a result of all the economic circumstances happening around the world, it just makes you completely lose faith in humanity. But for the 5 years, I was like, right, I've sat down. I've had to sit down with the camera on me to give evidence on the offset when I first went to the police station, and that information's now gone. It's been watched by people, and I don't fully remember what I've said. So if I get asked a question in court, like it feels like I'm having to relive the whole thing over and over and over and over again. Yeah.
I mean, you're amazing. I hope you don't mind me saying that. But I also want to ask you if it has it brought you some closure? Has it brought you some resolution? Has it helped with the other issues you were dealing with when you were bottling it all up?
I believe it has, because when you sort of sat and you're feeling a bit down and depressed, which I'm sure we all do, especially at this time of year, you think, well, at least I'm sat on my sofa listening to some nice music whilst he's sat in a prison cell twiddling his thumbs, wishing that he wasn't a paedophile.
Well, and you're yes, well, that's a very neat way of putting it, William. And has it brought you some peace in your other relations as well, in other areas of your life? Do you find it easier to relate to people and to do your job and stuff?
I believe it has done, but I think a good thing of that is just, especially with the current economic situation in the world, it's like you just got to bite the bullet and man up, haven't you, and stop whinging about everything and just. I
think if anyone's allowed to feel sorry for themselves, it's you. Yeah. But I take your point. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel like a very productive way of behaving. I find, and I've been through nothing like what you've been through. There's a difference between telling yourself at the age of 52 or 62 or 44 that you've got to clench your teeth and get through this, and remembering to be kind to the little boy that you used to be, because he doesn't need to stop whinging or man up or any of those things. He just needs to know that he's safe now, and he's safe now because of you. That can be very helpful. Not for everybody, but there will be people listening who have been very affected by what William shared, and that might be helpful to them. I hope so.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. PMQ's on the way. Events, dear boy, events unfolding in South Korea. That was a mad story. Were you following that story yesterday? And the Prime Minister calls martial law. The Parliament revolts. Footage of one of the opposition leaders climbing over a fence so they could get into Parliament. A unanimous vote against martial law, and the Prime Minister has to revoke it. And he was accusing his political enemies of aping North Korea and behaving in, or being sympathetic towards a totalitarian position. I can tell you yesterday that every newsroom in the country would have been ringing with the words, "Does anyone know a South Korea expert?" Do you remember the bloke whose children came into the back of the shop? Was he a South Korea expert? Do you remember that absolutely beautiful clip where the gentleman is being interviewed by the BBC and one of his children comes dancing into the room like this, like doing the whole, and then the other one comes in on one of those baby rollers, and then the mum, knowing that her husband is on TV live, the mum sort of tries to avoid the camera by crawling in like a commando and trying to usher the children out. The whole world is watching this magnificent backdrop to an otherwise, I think he was a South Korea expert. I hope he got lots of work yesterday. And of course in France as well, but more on that throughout the day on LBC. We return to the question of these inconceivable, actually, and unconscionable delays between a crime being reported and a verdict being reached. And the simple question I'm asking is, what's it like to be in that purgatory, in that hiatus, in that limbo? Limbo's the best word, I think. James is in Ipswich. James, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Okay, so let me get into it. So when I was up in Leeds for university, I was in my third year in 2020.
Yeah.
I'd fallen in love with my first love, and we were in her flat, and her flatmate had her boyfriend around from Manchester.
Right.
And we heard a lot of commotion happening in the next room. I went to go and see what was going on because we were trying to go to sleep. He was trying to wake her. So I kind of jumped into action. I'm not really a fighter, but
sure.
I just kind of tried. It was a fight or flight situation.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at fighting, to be honest with you. And I proceeded to kind of be battered in all sorts of forms for about 45 minutes.
Bravery comes in a lot of different shapes. So what you've just described to me sounds very brave.
Well, I mean, I kind of regret it, to be honest with you, but because of what happened, he broke my orbital, my nose. Some neighbours heard, and they called the police, and we had to wait about 45 minutes for the ambulance while he was kind of kicking and screaming, being taken by police.
Wow.
And obviously, my first love at the time, she kind of had to watch it all unfold.
Yeah.
And
God,
I lost consciousness at one point and everything. It was really crazy.
Yeah.
I actually at one point remember seeing myself looking down on all of it from the corner of the room to the top corner of the room. It was crazy. Anyways, after that, he was released on bail the next day, and COVID kicked in about a month or two after that. I had to wait about 2 years for the trial to happen, and he was pleading not guilty the whole time. I assume because he kind of knew that he might have a chance of us just kind of pulling out of the whole thing.
And because the courts were shut. So, I mean, there would be 2 more years of freedom, not knowing how long COVID was going to last for, but the alternative being to be locked up tomorrow. Because he knew he was banged to rights from the way that you have described it.
When the trial came to be, I think it was a hearing or something like that. I had to come back up to Leeds with my dad, and we waited in the courthouse all day. About 3:30, the barrister came over, just really not happy about it, and said, "This is going to have to be postponed for another 9 months."
Oh my goodness.
So after about a year, we then finally had the trial, and at that point, I had PTSD, severe PTSD. I'm quite a mentally stable guy, but I had to pay for therapy for that and everything like that. On the day of the trial, they brought in a community nurse that said that he had mild autism, so any of his testimony was not. I don't even know, reliable or something.
Okay. Yeah.
And what happened was he got a 2-year suspended sentence and 20 sessions of free therapy.
And you'd had to pay for yours. You feel absolutely cheated, don't you, by the system? Betrayed.
Yeah,
Betrayed.
Made me feel like, what was the point?
I'm always careful to acknowledge that I'm not in court and I'm not party to all of the evidence that was presented. I don't like the kind of radio shows that go after judges and go after decisions when all we've got is the headline. But listening to you, I feel nothing but sympathy for what you've been through, and it sounds hideously unfair. How big a factor in your trauma is the delay, is the length? Because let's imagine that you got the same conclusion but much more quickly. I presume, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, that would have been better in your life in terms of...
Well, my symptoms stopped a couple of weeks after the trial. That's what it is. I had to deal with that throughout COVID as well, which isn't the easiest thing to deal with.
No.
And, it was basically straight away, once I got some form of justice, everything kind of started to slot into place again.
I'm so glad to hear that, because goodness knows you deserve it. I'll read you one message. There's quite a few coming in, and I know you said that you regret doing what you did, but I know that you only half mean that, because what else could you have done in the circumstances? But Elle puts it best and speaks for many people when she writes, "Please thank James for doing what he did. I hope that a man like that is around should I ever need it."
That means something, I suppose.
It's an example to those of us who would be very bad at fighting, I suppose. You're a hero, mate, and I'm so sorry that the consequences of your heroism have been so hard for you to deal with. But I'm delighted to hear that 2 weeks after the verdict, which is probably the most powerful addendum to this story, isn't it, of delay, of justice delay. 2 weeks after the story, his symptoms start dissipating, the PTSD, the consequences of not having closure. It's a word that's often mocked, and I understand why, but the consequences of it spooling out like a fishing line, never ending, and there, when the end comes, even if it's an unsatisfactory ending, as that verdict clearly was, it is at least an ending, and therefore you can move into the part of your life that follows. But to postpone that point is, I'd say it was cruel. I'd say it was a punishment. So the victim of the crime is being punished. A few more people waiting to talk to me, and I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to have time. But we're going to have to keep an eye on this story, because I'll tell you something for nothing. They're not going to get it fixed overnight. And of course the urgency with which it needs to be fixed couldn't have been made clearer. But I will remind you, there are still some corners of the British media reporting on this as if it isn't a direct consequence of Boris Johnson's government. Much of it, not all of it, COVID, but the prisons failure, this massive collapse, this report yesterday from the National Audit Office, £4 billion over budget and insufficient, the prison places plan. One newspaper managing to report the entire thing without mentioning the government responsible for the failure. It is a new government now, of course, and the leader of it will be getting to his feet in the House of Commons shortly to take questions from the newish leader of the opposition. I speak of Kemi Badenoch, probably my favourite contributor to PMQs in all the years that we've been covering it live, Natasha Clark.
When can we stop calling it a new government, James? I think after Christmas we're going to have...
I said it's new compared to Boris Johnson's. Yeah. It will always be new compared to...
And Kemi as well.
Well,
Kemi
she's quite new. It's only, her fourth PMQs? Fifth? It's not many.
Yeah, I think after Christmas.
Okay.
Fresh start.
Are you asking me or telling me?
I'm telling you.
Okay, well, after Christmas, I promise. We won't use the word new anymore. Do you want to shall we have a quick word about the story you and Aggie Chambray have put together about the government's approach to TikTok, another cracking LBC exclusive. Just run us through the details of that first.
Yep, so me and Aggie have got this story today, and the government are looking at overturning in parts their TikTok ban, because essentially they know they need to be on it to reach younger voters. And you've talked a lot about the threat of reform on your programme with Aggie and others. They know that Nigel Farage is doing incredibly well on TikTok, getting really big numbers on lots of his content. I think that's really worrying people in Downing Street. They know that younger voters are the ones that they need to reach out towards. It all ties into this sort of conversation, though, about what the government are prepared to do in terms of security risk, in terms of China. It's obviously a Chinese-linked firm. ByteDance owns TikTok. So there is a lot of questions, really, about what this will mean for the government security services, for concerns about online safety and harms as well.
Real fears that contacts, content and location data could be falling into...
Exactly, which is exactly why they banned it in the first place. The Tory government around a year and a half ago said, no, you can't have it on your government devices because of these risks. And if they're going to use TikTok in some way within Number 10, within a new office that we're told it's going to be set up between the Cabinet Office and Downing Street to try and reach out to these younger voters, they're going to have to obviously have an account somewhere. They're going to have to give away some information, whether it's a government computer or a government phone. And there are going to be huge risks around that. Now, we're told that no final decision on this has been made, but, I think it is quite likely that, from the people I've been speaking to, that they're going to start to use TikTok. It hasn't been used for Number 10's accounts since Boris Johnson was Prime Minister.
Who?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, the old Prime Minister.
Yeah, that guy.
What are we expecting to happen at PM? And frankly, who knows? Given performances so far, but I can't wait.
Few thoughts. Yes. Louise Haigh, obviously, I know it feels like a long time ago since he resigned over that mobile phone related conviction, but it's the first time that Kemi Badenoch will have the chance to needle the Prime Minister on what he knew and why he decided to appoint her in the first place, if indeed he did know about her. It's also the first time MPs will go up against each other after the assisted dying debate. Kemi Badenoch voted against it. Keir Starmer voted for it. That is another wedge issue that she could potentially talk about.
If it's not whipped, is it a wedge issue?
Well, she's going to talk about how there are huge concerns remaining with lots of MPs and why this something that the Prime Minister feels is able to. I'd
be surprised on that one. We should do this more. We should have a bit of jeopardy. We should wear our scarves. I'd be surprised. I think Louise Haigh, yes.
Government reset, obviously. Plan for change to be unveiled tomorrow. This might be one that Kemi Badenoch might wait till next week to talk about. that. But why is the government having to have a reset or a relaunch after just 150 days in office? Might be something that Kemi Badenoch might
America
want to talk about.
and Europe. I mean, it was a big Mansion House speech, big foreign policy, quite substantive as well. Start comparing himself to Churchill and to Clement Attlee. Qatar,
I think, less likely. Kemi Badenoch was at the banquet with the Qataris last night. It would be a little bit rich of her to go in on this one. Elgin marbles, our favourite topic of the week, maybe brought up. That is something that I think Kemi Badenoch might try.
Parthenon marbles.
Sorry,
if you please. Parthenon marbles, if you please.
My apologies, sir.
She could go in on that, because that's very culture war-y, isn't it? People who don't know what they are, never seen them, wouldn't be able to point at them in a crowded room, absolutely adamant that they shouldn't be returned to the country where they were forged 2,500 years ago. She'll love that, won't she?
She will love that.
Ignorant
Absolutely.
emotion all day long. We shall see.
There's a lot to go on. And of course, farmers and national insurance will be discussed by the Tories in the Opposition Day debate later on. So those two things, she'd like to think she would tee up that debate later in the Commons today.
Well, I mean, again, on the marbles, Starmer has said it's a matter for the British Museum.
Yeah, but this
does that close down the culture war angle? I'm not sure it does.
It doesn't.
No.
The government have significantly changed their position on it since Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister and was telling them in no uncertain terms were they to give away or give back, or however like to call it, these Elgin Pantheon marbles. But yes, the government have changed on their position on this, now saying it's a matter for George Osborne and the museum. We know they want to do a deal. So, is this something that Keir Starmer will be able to accept? Yeah, I think so. I think he would be quite happy to see a loan deal. We didn't hear anything about whether that came up with the Greek Prime Minister yesterday when he was in Downing Street.
Mitsotakis.
I imagine it did. But number 10 remaining very tight-lipped on exactly what was discussed.
It's an interesting one. Christopher Hitchens and Lord Byron, both in favour of the return of the Parthenon marble. So I'm on their team. There aren't many issues. There's a few, particularly with Byron, but there aren't many issues on which you wouldn't want to have Christopher Hitchens and Lord Byron at your side if you're going in on a cultural issue.
Depends what we might get back in return in terms of other artwork and other cultural exchanges that George Osborne might want to grace us with.
As ever, at this point on Wednesdays, well, at least when Parliament is sitting, I remind you that we will curtail violently the minute that the Leader of the Opposition gets to their feet with their first question for the Prime Minister. So that's quite a list, isn't it? And I guess if you had to bet the house on one of them, you'd go with Louise Haigh.
I think so,
because that's embarrassing for the government, even though they acted to minimise the embarrassment.
It's his first resignation. There's no way that it's not a little bit embarrassing. But for Keir Starmer, he's got a few things to go on. There's some positive stuff from the OECD today, talking about growth and how it's going to go up next year thanks to the budget. I'm sure Keir Starmer will want to note that. And of course, the rail nationalisation today, that's something the government thinks is a really positive step forward. Whether it will mean your ticket will be lowered in price, whether it will mean your trains will run on time, that's another question. But the government absolutely convinced that this is a popular policy amongst the public, and I'm sure Keir Starmer will want to mention that.
What are the sort of biggest areas of substantive disagreement at the moment? Because there is that problem that Badenoch has of not being able to, I mean, that weird thing she said last week about you should resign now and let me have a go. But bless her. But the big areas where she could say we definitely wouldn't do that. You've got the farmers' tax thing.
That's about the only real thing that she's
talked
about in terms of policy.
That's what I was thinking.
And she did talk about the UCHR a couple of days ago in terms of migration. That is another issue which I think the Conservatives have said they'll put a cap.
And
Labour
here it
say
is.
they
Let's
won't.
find out. All bets are off.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to pay tribute to Mandy Damari and her family for the strength that they have shown. And we on this side of the House, and I'm sure the whole House, continue to seek the speedy release of Emily Damari and the other hostages. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about immigration. I think it's probably a good time to remind him that he was the one writing letters asking us not to deport foreign criminals. And he and his party voted against every single measure that we put in place to try and limit immigration. But, Mr. Speaker, the question today is what has been on the lips of all Labour MPs, including, I believe, the Health Secretary yesterday. The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Transport Secretary was right when further information came forward to resign. What a marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million and she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it, she advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
Mr. Speaker, he's obfuscating, but I'm going to keep him on the topic. He owes the House an explanation. He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light. What was that further information?
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. But whilst she's obsessing with the Westminster issues, we're getting on with fixing the mess, fixing the foundations, that £22 billion black hole, our prisons bursting, Mr. Speaker, as we found out last week, nearly 1 million net migration numbers because of the Tory open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about migration, I'm asking about the former Transport Secretary. He never answers any questions. He never answers any questions. And it looks like he didn't ask his Transport Secretary any questions either. The truth is, he appointed a person convicted of fraud to the Cabinet. The first thing she did was bung hundreds of millions of pounds in pay rises to her trade union friends. Wasn't this a fraud on the British people?
No, Mr. Speaker, she says she's not talking about immigration. I'm not surprised. And I advise her and all of them not to talk about the economy or immigration for another 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, you can try and change the topic as much as he likes, but the public are watching. He owes them an explanation. The country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. Now on to an even bigger fraud. Now on to an even bigger fraud, the budget. Last week, the Prime Minister failed to repeat the Chancellor's pledge of no more borrowing and no more taxes. It is obvious that they are coming back for more. In his manifesto, he committed to making Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. Does he stand by his own pledge?
Mr. Speaker, I gently remind her that 2 of her predecessors had convictions for breaking the COVID rules. I'd also invite her to look at the OECD report of this morning, which has upgraded growth for next year and the year after, which now puts us on target to be the highest growing major economy in Europe in the next 2 years. She should welcome that.
Mr. Speaker, I saw the OECD report, and what it said was that they will be coming back for more taxes. And I think the whole House would have heard him fail to repeat his own pledge. He can't even repeat the pledges that he made just a few weeks ago. We are here to stop him from damaging the economy, and that is why we are.
I want to hear the question. Can we burn up?
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing the same way they all laughed during the budget when they talked about raising NI. They have no idea what people out there are dealing with. And that is why yesterday we voted against his damaging jobs tax. Even former supporters, Chef Tom Kerridge, who endorsed Labour at the election, said that the budget was catastrophic. He built a real business employing young people, unlike his cabinet of trade union stooges, CV embellishers, and an actual fraudster. None of them have ever run a business. Why won't he listen to business who are saying his budget is catastrophic?
Mr. Speaker, I thought the scripted jokes were over, but we had another one about lectures about the economy from the party opposite. They broke the economy, mortgages through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole. And she talks about national insurance. She complains about the rise in national insurance week after week. But then 2 weeks ago, she says that she wouldn't reverse it. She signed trade deals, Mr. Speaker, that had farmers protesting in Whitehall. Now she pretends that she's their champion. She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister has discarded his own Labour leadership promises. He's dropped the 5 missions he said would define his government. He's ditched his pledge to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. We left office with UK the fastest growing economy in the G7. And business is saying he has damaged the economy with his budget. Tomorrow he's going to have an emergency reset, Mr. Speaker, just 5 months into his premiership. But why should anyone believe a word he says?
Mr. Speaker, the only relaunch on that side of the House is the leadership bids of her rivals. And they should she obviously hasn't read the OECD report of this morning, the fastest growth in the next 2 years of any major economy in Europe. We're proud of that. And they should never be allowed to forget the damage they did to our country. They used Britain like some sort of mad scientist experiment. Open borders, unfunded tax cuts, neglected health service. And now, all the madness is still coming out. They say they should be back in office. They haven't listened, they haven't learned, and they certainly haven't changed. There's only one party that's driving this country forward, and that's this Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, question 3, but who knows, next week I could be number 1 in the charts. Yeah. As the first MP this year to bring out a Christmas single, will the Prime Minister join me in thanking my musical collaborator, the hugely talented Mal Pope, and everyone involved with this year's Everyone Deserves hamper campaign that would deliver festive food to 1,500 homes across 5 constituencies in South Wales. Like our song says, there's a reason for the season and everyone deserves a Christmas.
Well, I thank her for her question. There's obviously going to be some rivalry in the race for number 1 by Christmas. I'm not going to be joining in that particular one. But I do thank her and Mal Pope for their campaigning. And I remember joining her in the summer, a few summers ago, on the work involving hampers, much needed by her constituents. And I know how much it means to them. Christmas is a time to think of others. And I do pay tribute to her and all those supporting those in need. And this government will always support the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you.
Here are the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I, for one, will be downloading the song of the Honourable Lady for Neath and Swansea East. Can I join the Prime Minister in his delight and also his support for Mani Damari, and our joint hope that we will see Emily and other hostages released as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to restore and rebuild the public's trust in British politics. Now, we believe a crucial part of that is reforming our electoral system to make it fairer and more proportional. And so does a majority of the British public. And this House voted yesterday in favour of a bill for electoral reform put forward by my honourable friend, the member for Richmond Park. So will the Prime Minister find government time, make it available, so we can consider this bill on electoral reform and restore the public's trust in our politics?
Can I thank him for referencing Emily, because I think it is important that we all remember her, and I say the awful torture that her mother is going through, and that's the case for all of the other hostages. It's hard to imagine what it must be like for anybody with friends and family who are still being held hostage after all this time. Look, proportional representation is not our policy. We won't be making time for it. And I just gently say to him, he didn't do too badly under the system as it is.
Right, David. Well, I'm disappointed in that reply and hope he will reflect on Labour's own policy. But moving on to another pressing subject, Mr. Speaker, more than 3 million people have been stuck on NHS waiting list for more than 18 weeks. That's probably the worst, most appalling legacy of the last Conservative government, and it needs to be fixed. But does the Prime Minister accept that we'll only get waiting lists down and keep them down if it's easier for everyone to see a GP when they need it? So when he publishes his milestones tomorrow, will he include a guarantee with a timetable so people will be able to see a GP within at least 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent?
Yeah. Well, he's right to draw attention to the record of last government on the NHS. Record waiting lists and record low confidence in the NHS. So in addition to the economy and immigration, they better not be talking about that for the next 5 years either. We will be driving this down. We've already begun that work to make sure we get those waiting lists down. And yes, of course, that does also include making sure there's better access to GPs and other measures that need to be taken. But that's a central driving mission of this government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that a significant number of members
as the clock just ticks past 16 minutes after 12, we withdraw from events in Parliament. We'll have a brief hiatus, and then Natasha Clark and I will pick over the bones of what you have just heard. It is, as I say, 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sometimes you get a sniff of a story, and you think that can't be right, because if it was right, it would be much bigger than it actually is. And I'm in that position this afternoon. I'm in that position today. And an MP has just stood up in the House of Commons and made precisely, South Antrim Ulster Unionist, actually, Robin Swan, has just drawn attention to precisely the issue that I think might be a rather bigger deal than an awful lot of people who should know better have thus far acknowledged. Talking about import and export checks, longer queues at the border and the like. If you thought that saga was over, I think you might be wrong. And December the 13th could be a form of D-Day for you. And remarkably, given that it's just been raised in the House of Commons, I've got a guest joining me, James Ball from the New European, joining me after the 12:30 news to sound, I think it's probably fair to say, to sound the alarm on this one. But before that, and before we go to Natasha, the now traditional run-through of some of the texts that came in during PMQs. This from Ian. I'm Labour through and through, but Badenoch was much better today. This from Caroline. She sounds like a school ground bully. Why can't we have grown-up politics? This from Madeline. Poor showing from Starmer. He's making Badenoch sound reasonable and principled. Chris writes, I wish Starmer could have shut that nonsense down. Neil points out the first thing she mentioned was immigration, and then she goes on to say, I'm not talking about immigration. I think she said, I'm not asking about immigration, to be fair. Rob says she's an absolute joke. Kyle says, I didn't think it could get any worse. Is Keir Starmer writing her speeches for her to set up his own points? And Wouter makes a point that many of you make. Wouldn't Badenoch have been a convict had Harriet Harman pushed for prosecution when Badenoch hacked and changed her website? Tony has enjoyed things as much as we have. He writes, you're right, James, she's hilarious.
Who messaged the Harriet Harman thing in?
Wouter.
Someone, a Labour source has just basically said the same thing to me.
Really?
Bold of Kemi to go in on Louise, given she boasted about hacking Harriet Harman's website, which carried a jail sentence of up to 5 years at the time.
Yes.
Should have put that one in the Prime Minister's
Well, it was a great
pack.
line. I mean, and again, it's why I think she's so good for business. Politicians with convictions. We want conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. That was a good line. It's a brilliant line, until you remember that the last two Tory Prime Ministers have been politicians with convictions. Of sorts, yes. And that, as you say yourself, she's herself confessed to a crime that would have resulted in a custodial sentence had Harriet Harman been minded to pursue it. But she was better.
She was better.
There was room for improvement.
There's
and you were
always room
better.
for
You got
improvement.
Louise Haigh bang on.
Yeah, I did all right there. Louise Haigh, tick. Reset, tick. Assisted dying, no. We didn't have too much about that.
Told you.
And there was one more that I got
Elgin
right.
Marbles.
Didn't get
There's
Elgin Marbles.
2 all, actually, because I told you those two wouldn't come up.
Did get OECD, though.
Yes.
Told you we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think overall, Kemi Badenoch, another better performance. She's just better when she just takes the tone down, slows her answers down a little bit, relaxes into it a little bit, and just stops throwing petty insults across the chamber. And that's what I think that makes Keir Starmer rise to it. And it brings a little bit of grown-up politics back to the chamber. It shows that they can do it. It's still entertaining. It's still a good watch without having to throw barbs quite so much at each other.
It actually plays into his hands when she does that as well, because that makes him look like a grown-up while she looks like the sort of Nerf gun school child.
Exactly.
But that didn't happen this week, to be clear. I think we're both saying that.
That's obviously, like we were saying before, there's plenty of stuff for the Tories to go on here. There's a long list of things that is, more than ripe to ask questions about. Louise Haigh, of course, understandable that was top of Kemi Badenoch's list.
Why doesn't he answer it better? He didn't answer that well. He didn't answer it at all, to be fair, which people do notice. She's right when she says the public are watching.
They do, and the Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner beforehand, repeatedly not very good at answering the questions.
Truss.
We forgot Liz Truss.
Well, I did.
Oh, you did.
You
did last two.
So,
well, it's easy to be done.
Who could possibly forget Liz Truss? Eh? Well, I do apologise.
Congratulations.
I apologise to the lettuce.
Congratulations to Michel Barnier, who will be apparently a couple of days more than Liz Truss in office, if indeed this vote of confidence happens today.
I did just call them the Elgin Marbles, as Jamie points out, but no one likes a pedant, Jamie. Why doesn't he? I mean, why doesn't he just tell us what? I mean, because he can't say we've done it because the right-wing media in this country would not let it rest, or because he can't give the real reason for it, or because he's found out stuff that he didn't know before.
Well, that was the suggestion from Downing Street on Friday, that there was more that came out about Louise Haigh's previous convictions, offences of sorts, for what she did and didn't tell the police about a stolen mobile phone. And it's a very complicated story, but Downing Street suggesting that Keir Starmer didn't have the full story when he appointed her as Northern Ireland Secretary in opposition, and then appointed her to the cabinet. Now, we don't know if that's 100% true and what he did and didn't know, but there are questions for him to answer. Why did he feel that it was important to put her in this position? He obviously couldn't back her. That was quite clear from today's Prime Minister's questions, and that's does probably say a little bit more about it than we might usually first read into it.
Yes.
The fact that he's not come out and said, actually, I'm going to pay tribute to Louise Haigh. She was a great Transport Secretary. Thanks so much for your service.
Yeah.
He didn't say a word about it.
He really didn't, did he? So that suggests he may feel let down.
A little bit, yeah, and maybe a little bit thrown in front of the bus.
I think we're allowed to speculate. We're not running any risk of libel. And if we work on the presumption that there may be more to come, and I think we've probably both heard whispers that how much momentum is removed from any coming revelations by the resignation?
It's totally gone. The wind's out the sails now. Whatever comes out about Louise Haigh, she's now a former cabinet minister. It might stop her from going back into the cabinet. Yes. Keir Starmer did hint in his resignation letter, the exchange of letters that we saw last week, that he would like to see her back in frontline government at some point, and other ministers have said that in the morning rounds the past couple of days. So that's a possibility. But if more comes out about what happened with this conviction and what didn't, then I think that could kill her chances of a cabinet comeback.
And journalistically, how much would change there? So if you were pursuing this story, who was it, the Times that got it?
Times and Sky News both broke that.
Will they be going after it with as much enthusiasm as they would have done if she was still in the ministry?
No,
if you take it to your news editor, it's a long time since I had to speak to news editors, Natasha. You take it to your news editor, do they say, well, come on, this horse has bolted? Really?
They will, right. Absolutely. The momentum is sort of gone now. I'm sure they'll still be digging around for whether there is anything and what Keir Starmer did and didn't know at the time, and there will be people who I'm sure wanted to talk about. The interesting thing is, who briefed that story? Where did it come from? Someone must have known about this conviction, where it came from, unearthed the documents, and did it to sort of, unearth and embarrass Louise Haigh, and it ultimately got a scalp at the end of it. Who are her enemies in government or outside of government actually working to bring her down? We had the P&O ferry row, which obviously left her on quite thin ice with Downing Street. Somebody probably knew that if they put this out in the public domain, it was going to tip her over and she was going to be out of cabinet.
They're perceived as very much to the left of the current cabinet, which some people may think perhaps explains the process you've just described. We haven't spoken about this, it occurs to me. So how big a loss is she to Keir Starmer? How big is... I mean, today we learn that a railway line is being nationalised. It's a huge political moment, and the woman that would have presided over it is no longer in post.
Exactly. I think it is huge. And, the transport agenda, the Department for Transport's got some of the biggest number of bills in any department. In the King's speech, it was really packed with stuff that they want to do. Nationalising the railways, of course, something that Keir Starmer thinks is a fantastically popular policy amongst the public, even if it might not reduce our bills, even if it might not make the trains run any more on time. We're all going to have to wait to see the details of what Great British Rail will give us first. But yes, this should have been Louise Haigh's big moment, announcing the first railways to come into nationalisation will start next year in May, and these are the companies that it's going to affect. This should have been her moment, for the government, it's potentially quite embarrassing that she had to resign in this way.
Have you had much to do with her?
Yeah, I've met her a couple of times. I've met her.
She's nice.
People. Yeah, she's lovely. She's really nice. But look, that's not about what I think, is it?
Yeah, I know. I'm just interested.
But yeah, look, I think she's quite down to earth as a cabinet minister. I think I don't think Keir Starmer will hugely miss her in cabinet because I don't think they're natural political bedfellows. She's far more to the left of the Labour Party, but equally he knows the importance of keeping people like Louise Haigh in cabinet because he needs to hold this coalition of the Labour Party together, and without those left-wing voices that come with the support of the unions, that come with the support of the grassroots of the Labour Party, his entire coalition risks falling apart if he doesn't keep that together.
It's interesting. And Heidi Alexander has been around a while.
She has.
She's a known quantity.
She has a trusted voice and, worked with Sadiq Khan as Deputy Mayor for Transport. She knows this brief back to front. She does know about transport. She's another woman to obviously knock back the critics who say, you're just going to appoint another man to the heart of government. So there's that. And I think she's slightly probably more to the right of the party than Louise Haigh, but still sort of fits the bill there. So yes, I think there are questions for Keir Starmer to answer on this one. It does potentially embarrass him. It is his first cabinet resignation, and it is quite soon into government. It doesn't usually happen this quickly. But yes, I think Keir Starmer failing to answer the questions, like I say, really does tell you a little bit about what he thinks about Louise Haigh. And
finally, a lot of people may be a little bit nonplussed by the enthusiasm Keir Starmer has for talking about immigration. And for two obvious reasons. Number one, he is in charge of it, and it is almost always bad news if you're coming from the position that immigration is generally bad, which is unfortunate, but arguably that argument has been lost by fact fans. And secondly, because the Labour Party is perceived, rightly or wrongly, I think rightly historically, as being more relaxed about immigration than the Conservative Party. But he's hitting her hard with phrases like open borders.
Yeah. It's really interesting seeing the way that Keir Starmer handles the issue of migration. It's something that he obviously knows is such a hot political potato, not just for the right-wing press, but for a lot of everyday working-class people up and down the country have genuine concerns about it.
And middle-class and upper-class, Natasha.
Everybody, for sure. But that was what Keir Starmer mentioned in his migration speech last week in Downing Street. When he was referring to these sky-high migration numbers that have actually been revised up, 900,000 net migration the year before last. Like I say, all under the Tories. Really interesting, though, that he's still saying it's too high and I'm going to bring the numbers down. He will be able to do that.
Well, he won't. He will, but they're going to come down anyway. So this is clever politics, albeit quite transparent for those of us who watch it for a living, is that they're going to come down quite far and quite fast for obvious reasons, not just Ukraine and Hong Kong, but also the consequences of some of the policies that the last government brought in. And you can close your eyes for a while and ignore the growing vacancies in some of the most affected sectors. But he can do this rhetoric, secure in the knowledge that when they come down largely through gravity than anything else.
A bit like Rishi Sunak and inflation, right?
Bingo.
It's going to happen.
It's a win.
It's a win.
And except unlike Rishi Sunak and inflation, he doesn't render himself a hypocrite because he hasn't claimed at any point that he had nothing to do with them going up.
Yeah, true.
Because he didn't.
True, completely true. But I'm sure he will take credit for them coming down once they do.
Which explains the rhetoric, the slightly
he's talking tough now, and he's going to say later on, look,
told you.
Exactly, I've done it. But yeah, look, his language on migration last week was really tough. Keir Starmer knows he's got to keep that wing of his party happy, and he knows it is a big issue. Small boat's a big issue. Lots of Labour MPs telling me it's still continued to be a big issue, especially in places like Kent. He knows he's got to be on the ball on this, and we are expecting a plan for how he's going to further drive down those numbers. I think he will get a bit stuck, the fact that he's not put any form of number or ballpark figure on this at all. What is acceptable and what is not? And, the Tories got themselves into a huge muddle over the 100,000 figure.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, which is totally why he doesn't want to do it. But actually, he's got to say, well, actually, what does he think is reasonable? And it opens up this argument again. How much are the Tories prepared to sacrifice economic growth in favour of migration? That's the argument that the Tories grappled with for years and completely failed to do both, arguably. Growth on the floor, migration soaring. So they got the worst of both worlds, and Keir Starmer, I think, should keep an eye on that one.
Natasha Clark, great stuff. Thank you. Do you keep a tally? That was probably a good week for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was good. I think I got 3. I'll take 3 if that's okay.
That's a huge win.
I think it's a good win
for me.
Definitely.
12:31 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We did not know when we invited James Ball to join us in the studio today that an Ulster Unionist MP would stand up in the House of Commons today and draw attention to precisely, in the last 10 minutes, precisely the issue that you have drawn attention to, James, in the pages of the New European. I'm going to do something that I can say with, I think, supreme confidence. I'm going to introduce James in a way that no one will ever be able to introduce me. I'm going to say, I'm joined now by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist.
Hey, give it time.
We can but dream. And it's Brexit.
It's Brexit. It's always Brexit. We can never escape it.
You've caught the show before, have you? So what caused your antennae to twitch, and how violent are the twitchings?
So basically, a load of small business owners were kicking off, and I spotted this because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I follow people in sort of UK comics who print comics, sell them around the world, indies, and there's some new EU regulations coming in, general product safety regulations, and if you're in the EU, they're pretty boring. You've got to do a risk assessment if you sell a product. That seems fair enough.
Yes.
You've got to put safety information on the package. It's got to be in the language of the country you send it to now. Now, the EU's got loads of languages, so that means a bit of Google Translate and sticking a label on. All a bit annoying, but fine. But you have to have a named EU point of contact for every product you sell now. And you might have noticed we're not in the EU. So if you run a design business and you sell greetings cards or art prints and you sell them to the EU, you need someone in the EU to say, you can contact me if this isn't safe.
Oh, so it's more than just a mailbox address. It's a point of contact.
Yeah, and so you can kind of have a mailbox address. People are going to look and go, I spoke to a haberdasher's and she was telling me, I sell 2 metre long strips of cotton with dyes.
Yeah.
She had each one of them's different, but they're not all dangerous in different ways. Someone is got to be happy to put their name, but they charge money for that. They charge about €150 per item.
Gosh.
Now, if you sell cardboard
Small
boxes
items, yes.
and you sell 1 million of that same cardboard box, that's no bother. If you sell hundreds of different little design things, and that's what British small businesses do. They're creative businesses. They do vintage computer parts. They do all sorts of stuff like this. That's your export business gone. But there's bigger problems than that as well, because anything that sells to Northern Ireland has to comply with EU rules. So you might not even be trying to export. You're just trying to run your small business. And suddenly, to be able to sell within the UK legally, you've got to have someone in the EU to be a point of contact. And if you sell on Amazon, you have to be able to sell to Northern Ireland.
Someone in the EU, but not in Northern Ireland, wouldn't count.
So this is the thing that's not clear. There's basically no government guidance on this. The Federation of Small Businesses has been trying to advise. Amazon sent out some advice. But at the moment, you've got loads of people who run, little business in their spare time or as they're raising their kids. Even some medium-sized businesses, the government's not warned them. And so they're trying to work out, what do I have to do to not suddenly be breaking this new rule? Because it comes in next week.
On December the 13th.
December, right before Christmas. So there will
be people listening to this now, almost certainly, who run small, medium-sized enterprises, who export some goods to the European Union, and this will be the first they've heard of it?
That will almost certainly be the case. I mean, we wrote it in the New European a couple of days ago, and we've had loads of people saying they're sending it to their friends or they're sending it to stuff who didn't know. And that's some bigger businesses too. Now, this isn't going to hit you if you're Unilever or you're someone like that. You've got offices in the EU. This is fine. The regulation on its own is nothing that stupid. It's just, it seems to have caught everyone out. And it does feel like, at least with the other Brexit headaches, it's become much harder to export. But the government warned people there was awareness.
£3 billion in the news today in what's already been lost in exports to the European Union from the United Kingdom. And this is just adding grist to that particular mill.
There's people quite sad as well, because there's all sorts of faff now. If you sell to the EU, you need a customer who'll pay a customs charge when it's delivered, because there's rules about how they take VAT and stuff. So they've got to really want to buy from you. You've only got your most dedicated customers left. And these people that have stuck with them, they're now having to turn and say, actually, I just can't anymore. It would cost me more to sell to you. And so it's really kind of devastating some pretty small businesses that have had a hard few years anyway.
For sure. And it could, of course, be the difference between survival and not. Why do you... I mean, I invite you to speculate in a way that you don't really in the article, except to say that he's kind of avoidant on all matters Brexit, but that wouldn't necessarily... Are they throwing these people under the bus? Are they collateral damage in the context of the continuing Brexit? Or why do you think Labour have been remiss on this?
So I went to the Department of Business and Trade because they've sort of... A Little Quango has held 2 online seminars about this, but there's been no ad campaign, no business awareness campaign, no good information site. I kind of said, is this that you didn't know or that you don't care? Is it that these are a rounding error in the size of the economy and you've just decided it's not where you should focus your efforts? And I got a very defensive statement going, we're going to put out lots of information.
When?
Well, 10 days before me.
Yeah.
Where you're like,
any sign of it
that's
yet?
no good. I still haven't seen it.
You probably would do.
And obviously they didn't address the point on whether it's they didn't know or they didn't care. But it does just look like someone's dropped a ball on this. And it's going to cause a lot of people misery right before Christmas.
Which is why we're covering it now. I'm blessed, James, with an inbox that still contains a few people who voted for less regulation, to get rid of red tape, to make trade easier between these two markets. Here's one. Here we go. EU regulations, the closed market, persisting in their efforts to make us fail. Our friends and partners, right? Spectacular ignorance on what the membership of the single market involves. But to be clear, none of this will affect people who are still in the European Union. It is only those who've either never been in it or elected to leave it that are going to be negatively affected by the new.
So it affects you if you're China and you've got to ship goods, but they ship lots of identical goods. I mean, that's who
there
this
aren't
is.
Many small Etsy-type operators in China selling individual customer Atari parts.
This is aimed really at those big Chinese manufacturers,
so
that people know it's safe. This isn't to punish us. We are just, as you say, in the crossfire.
Indeed. And what's happening on eBay? Do we know? Because a couple of people are telling me that eBay will make goods invisible, possibly. I don't know if that's...
eBay seems to be trying to find a work around it.
Right.
I mean, I've looked more at Etsy, and you've just got seller after seller saying, this is it for me. Some of them are just saying, I've shut down exports. But I've seen at least sort of 5 people just letting me know alone in the last day, they're shutting down their shop.
Well, here's another one. I hope she's not shutting down her shop, but Tansy Hark is the founder of Kind Collection, an independent jeweller, which is almost the perfect exemplar, isn't it, of individual items, each of which will need the paperwork and the rigmarole that you described, working predominantly on wedding and engagement rings, which, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's one of the last things in the world that you want to turn up late if you're the customer. And Tansy joins me on the line now. How much did you know about this? When did you discover it, and how is it going to affect you? You can answer that in whatever order you prefer.
Well, so I actually only really found out about this because I am part of a collective of jewellers. So we kind of share information and try and kind of help each other along. And it was just sort of something that someone had seen share on Instagram. And
did you think it must be untrue, and you feel it can't be right? This wouldn't be coming out of nowhere.
I did think this is coming out of nowhere. Firstly, that it was just being shared, by another small business and not by kind of like a government ad scheme or by our kind of website providers. But also just that it's happened so close to Christmas.
How do you think it's going to affect you? Do you know? Do you have the full details yet? Are you clear?
Well, for me in particular, I'm kind of lucky in the regard that most of my customers are in the UK.
Right.
But it does mean that, I'm having to pause all kind of web sale orders, so the less sort of personalised, the ones straight off my website.
The ones
pausing
that
those.
would be more popular at Christmas.
Exactly, and that really is the time of year because it's mainly gifting and investment pieces rather than sort of quick buys. People do wait until Christmas, so it feels like a real shame and just sort of another obstacle, really.
And your feelings are shared, I mean, accordingly in the whole of the collective, with some people more affected than others. Have you had any guidance yet?
Absolutely.
Is there any official steer?
So I'm booked on to a seminar tomorrow through the Department of Business and Trade. But again, I found out about this through the collective.
So that would be December the 5th, exactly 8 days before it kicks in. And it kicks in like a guillotine, James. It comes in.
Well, and also...
Sorry, go on, Tansy.
Well, I was going to say also, I think that it's that things that arrive after this date. So I think there's also a bit of worry just in terms of there could be people who have already been working on orders which haven't been sent yet, which then could get kind of, people have been working on a bespoke order for the last 2 months and they thought, oh, well, I'll send it out just before Christmas. They now could be in trouble if they get anything wrong and if they haven't kind of allocated their responsible person and paid the costs involved in that.
And that would, for some of the items you sell, if you were selling them into Europe, that would eat your margin. It would make it not worthwhile doing an individual if you were sending 100 rings or a box of 1,000, it's very different from sending one bespoke article.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's still unclear. So I don't know 100% what the rules are. But, if I'm using a kind of a diamond that's come from Canada rather than a diamond that's come from Namibia or South Africa, it does that depend on the product being kind of different each time, or can it be as vague as it being kind of gold jewelry or silver jewelry? So it's all kind of unclear, which is why I've decided to pause, just so that we don't find ourselves in a position that we're kind of, held accountable.
You can't take risks with diamonds, I don't know. You can't I'll just stick it in the system and see if it arrives.
Exactly. And also just from a kind of being a responsible business owner, I don't want to leave my customers in a position where items are held up because I haven't done my due diligence.
Of course. Well, I hope that seminar addresses many, if not all, but provides the clarification that you clearly need. Kind Collection is the name of Tansy's jewellery company, if you want to find out more about the work that she's doing as an independent jeweller. What can people listening to this in similar situations to Tansy, possibly even more exposed to the problem, but only hearing about it now for the first time, James Ball, what can they do?
So if they've got time to register...
It's like Watchdog, this is,
isn't it? Very consumer. If they've got time to register for the export seminar from the Department of Business and Trade, that's the best advice you'll get. The Federation for Small Businesses represents all small businesses. They've got online information. Amazon, Etsy and eBay all have info up for their sellers as well. And if you check your inbox, you may have just knocked it off as more spam from them.
Good point.
But they have been letting sellers know. So there's some information out there, but we don't know things like if you sell 20 different designs of greetings cards, usually that counts as 20 different items for most laws. But have they taken some common sense here? Is there flexibility? I haven't found anything saying there is, but you can still hope that there's some guidance or something out there. So I don't want to alarm people and say it's definitely doom. It's just...
But it's definitely not good.
Well, I went out as a professional looking for the reassuring information. I work for a pro-European newspaper. New European doesn't want to spread myths.
No.
And we couldn't find the reassurance. So we had to go, actually, this is the information that they have, and this is why people are stopping their sales.
Doing a cracking job. Everyone at the New European doing a cracking job. But we're grateful today, in particular, to you. And keep us posted, won't you, James?
Will do.
It's James Ball, journalist and author. The most recent book being The Other Pandemic, your investigation into QAnon, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that also comes highly recommended. But it is, of course, important at this point to observe that back in 2016, don't forget, very patronising to suggest otherwise, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. More details on that, you can find it in James's article in the New European, although, as he says, go to the online sellers, the online selling platforms and elsewhere to find out more. I wish I could give you more information, but that's the point of the tale, isn't it? The government have not filled the space. But Graham is confident, you don't need to worry. He goes, here we go again. James O'Brien banging on about Brexit once again. Why don't you highlight the big market we will have in America when we get Donald Trump as president in January? That's Graham in Liverpool. Shall I give you his phone number so you can ring him and ask him about these wonderful new opportunities that the people whose businesses are going to be negatively affected by Brexit in 8 days' time are going to just have to sit tight for a fortnight, lads. And Graham knows all the secrets about how you're going to have wonderful new business. Shall I give you his phone? Do you want his phone? Is it all right, Graham, if I give out your phone number? Is that okay? I'll take it on advisement because I have marginally more important things to do. The Observer newspaper, you may have heard, is going through a period of, I think we could probably say, confusion, which has led to industrial action, a strike today called by journalists at The Guardian and The Observer in protest at the proposed sale of the Sunday newspaper. The Observer is probably the only truly Sunday newspaper left, actually, in the sense that everywhere else has become a variation on a 7-day operation. The Observer is very much its own institution, and it has been proposed by the Scott Trust that own The Guardian that they sell it to Tortoise Media, which is a website, and it's prompted grave unrest among Guardian and Observer journalists, culminating, as I say, in the first strike at The Guardian in more than 50 years. It's unfolding today and tomorrow. Henry Porter is a renowned novelist and journalist who, of course, writes for The Observer, and he joins me now. What is everybody worried about, Henry?
I think, in a nutshell, they're worried about a paper which sells about 106,000 to people who want a liberal voice on a Sunday, going behind a paywall with no guaranteed audience at all. That's what they're worried about. And I think the second part of it is they're worried about liberal journalism as a whole. You know, we had the Washington Post and the LA Times shut down by their rich proprietors prior to the election.
Oh, there you see. There you go. We'll try and get Henry back on another line, but of course, when he says shut down, he means not stepping into the electoral scenario in the run-up to Donald Trump's election. Two newspapers with a very strong liberal tradition that you would expect to come out in favour of the liberal candidate, and because of the nature of the newish ownership, they failed to do so. Why do you think Tortoise might be a threat to what you've just described? James Harding, who runs it, former Times editor, received some credit for standing up to Rupert Murdoch. Some people believe he ceased to be the Times editor for failing to do that, and an ex-director of BBC News, which most people don't recognise as leaning heavily towards the right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first point is he hasn't really got an organisation which yet is up to running The Observer. Now, he has lost, I think, in the entire history of his operation, he's lost about £16.1 million. He's never made a profit. Now, The Observer does okay. Yes. At least it contributes to The Guardian. It's very hard to know what The Observer does make or doesn't because it's so integrated into The Guardian. But it's really a fantastically valuable resource for The Guardian, and as is The Guardian for The Observer, and they are joined at the hip. And the problem with this sudden and slightly secretive deal that Harding came up with is that it doesn't offer the guarantee that was extended to The Observer when Hugo Young, as chair of the Scott Trust in 1993, signed off on its purchase. Yes. And he said, we're there for you for eternity. And that's a really big deal for us. The big deal for liberal journalism. Liberal journalism is getting, as I said, is coming under attack all over the world. But, you know, it's a really important part of a diverse media landscape. I hate all that jargon, but that's what it is. It's a diverse media landscape, and it's a member of that landscape. And between 2006 and 2010, I campaigned on civil liberties. I thought the Labour government was attacking civil liberties. Yes. I must have written something in the region of 300 columns on that subject. Maybe 200, but I'm not sure. But the point is, no other newspaper in the land would have given me that platform. And I think that's why it's so crucial.
Yes, and there'll be other subjects in a similar area, a lack of partisanship as well, which is not necessarily unique to the liberal media, but certainly much easier to find there than in the right-wing media. Do we know where the money's coming from to make this purchase? Is there any...
No, we don't, no.
Okay.
I mean, the key thing is that it's been done at an exclusive period, so that Mr. Harding and GMG, which is the report that runs Guardian, have a period of, I think, up to the 17th or 18th of December to talk about this, chat about this deal exclusively. Now, there are other people out there. We know there are other people out there who will show their hands the moment they can. And, it's basically being given away now with a guarantee of funding over a few years.
Is there any prospect, Henry, and I ask this question not in a sense of mischief, but very much in a sense of curiosity, is there any chance that the sale could go through, James Harding could take over, and none of the fears and discombobulations that you and your colleagues have would prove to be founded?
Well, I guess you always have to think that. I mean, I was a very, very strong Remainer, and I had to concede that in 2016 I didn't know how it would turn out. But I was pretty sure how it would turn out, and I was right.
Yeah, all right. I'm not going to argue with that.
And I had the same instinct, the same worry. It's like putting a Rembrandt on Hyde Park railings, with all those artists on Sunday and hoping it's going to be okay. It isn't. It's an heirloom. It's one of the great parts of our history, and we should regard it as that.
And that's a quality of analogy that we love on this programme. Thank you. That's first-class stuff. Thank you, Henry. And part of the industrial action calls upon consumers of Guardian and Observer journalism to refrain from sharing any articles from any of their sites for the duration of these 2 days. First strike in more than 50 years. Henry Porter, novelist, journalist, analogist. Many thanks for your time. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. So do download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4, but Sheila Fogarty's back once again like a renegade master.
Yes, exactly. Hanging off a railing in Hyde Park.
Enough about Friday night.
With fake raindrops all over it.
James O'Brien on LBC.